They ran through the streets of the city and destroyed everyone they encountered. It was an army of zombies and other undead creatures whose bodies were already almost rotten and decomposed. People screamed for help and tried to flee from these demonic creatures, but it was futile. The walls collapsed under the onslaught of the undead, and they swarmed to take the last human stronghold. The best of the royal knights tried to stop one of the undead army who was dressed in black knight's armor. The royal knight was a master swordsman of the highest rank, so defeating him was not so easy. However, the knight in black armor had his own secret to victory. He was an incredibly talented swordsman and could replicate any sword technique. After just a few minutes of fighting, the royal knight's sword was stuck in the ground. Kneeling beside his sword, the strongest swordsman in the Eos Empire said that this battle was incredible, and added that he expected nothing less from the fatal knight. The fatal knight watched as the body of the strongest swordsman turned to ash under the effects of black magic, and the wind scattered it around. It was impossible to tell who was hiding under the Black Knight's armor. The terrifying helmet with horns eloquently described the essence hidden behind it. Using his skill with the sword, the fatal knight cut his helmet in half. Both parts of his terrifying helmet fell to the ground right at his feet. He leaned on his sword and covered his face with his hand, because it had not seen the light for a long time. The fatal knight groaned heavily and his fingers slid across his face, opening his red, dazed eyes. But in the next moment, his gaze became clear and he finally looked at the world with his own eyes. That day, his consciousness returned to a body that had not been under his control for many years. His skill had reached its peak and was able to break the dark spell and regain control of his body. The man looked around fearfully. The flag of the Eos Empire slowly burned above the fire-engulfed fortress that was the last refuge of the people. He exclaimed that it was unsurpassed. Finally, this empire of people was torn to pieces by his own hands. His wild laughter filled the air. With delight in his voice, he noted that ancient wisdom says that revenge is a dish best served cold. Stepping over the bodies of the dead people to the burning fortress, the dark magician could not contain his satisfaction. Stopping in front of the captured king, the mage said that he had accomplished what he had planned to do 1,000 years ago. Then he asked if the king could imagine his joy. The laughter of the dark necromancer, who had reached the level of Archlick, filled the air once again. The king of the Helios Empire, Howard Adele Light, cried out in despair, asking how he dared to destroy his people. Then, calling the sorcerer a vile demon, he asked if hell was not enough for him. Although the Archlick had no face and it was impossible to say for sure whether he was smiling, he clearly looked satisfied. With a satisfied chuckle, the sorcerer remarked that he had never heard a more charming insult, and then asked if the king had finished speaking and wanted to proceed with the coronation. The king sarcastically repeated the word coronation and exclaimed that it was complete nonsense. The sorcerer said that of course it was his coronation and laughed, noting that he was the first in history to unite the continent. King Howard understood that he had no choice but to give up the crown and await execution. Archelich shouted praise to his demon lords and the fatal knight, saying that it was excellent work. After that, the sorcerer ordered that since it had come to that, they should bring him the monarch's crown. All the demons clapped their hands joyfully as the fatal knight carried the crown to give it to Archlick. When he approached, Archlick called him his faithful knight and told him that he had played a key role in the realization of his plan. The sorcerer asked how he could repay him for such devoted service. Rubbing his chin as if in thought, the Archlick said that it was a silly question, for he was his slave. The sorcerer began to say that serving him was the highest reward when he saw the monarch's crown fly up. With one incredibly quick movement, the fatal knight cut the monarch's crown in half. Archlick immediately put up a shield of dark magic in front of him, so that the fatal knight could not reach him. All the demon lords came to the defense of the Archlick, aiming their weapons at the fatal knight. No one even blinked when the Archlick let out a whimper, and then asked in confusion what had come over him. Holding his wound, the Archlick noted that he had reached him despite his strong magical protection. The sorcerer emphasized that he had not ordered him to do so. Exhaling, the fatal knight looked at the Archlick and said that he was finally in control of his own body. Stunned, Archlick asked why he was talking, since he had completely destroyed his consciousness. The knight replied that it may have seemed that way from the outside, but in reality, it had not gone anywhere. He said that he had seen and understood everything while he was imprisoned in his own body. The Archlick said that he was actually his greatest creation, and that for his successes he would give him the opportunity to vent his anger. Emphasizing that this would only be until he regained control of his body, Archlick ordered the demon lords to take him. But they did not even have time to approach the fatal knight before he dealt with them, with a single swing of his giant sword. Surprised that the demon lords fell from a single blow, Archlick decided to summon the rest of the undead. The sorcerer ordered an army of several thousand zombies and bone ogres to take the fatal knight. But even such an army did not frighten the fatal knight, as he had served the Archlick for many years and had also learned magic. Using his magic, the fatal knight shouted for them to stop, and when the army froze in place, he ordered them to turn to ash. His magic worked because it was powerful enough. All the undead began to crumble, scattering into tiny particles. The Archlick thought that this could not be. It turned out that he had created a monster whose power was equal to that of the gods. Looking at the creation of his own hands, Archlick noticed that it was probably very angry. The sorcerer said he understood him because anyone in his place would have done the same. But in his mind, Arkalich added that it had not yet won. If it destroyed this body, it would simply transfer its soul into another body, and then it would take control of it again. Raising his sword, the knight said that he had been imprisoned inside for many long years and had been thinking all this time about how to finish him off. Preparing for the attack, the fatal knight announced that in order to destroy him, he had created a technique capable of cutting even the soul. Archlich thought that such a technique could not possibly exist, but it looked dangerous and it was better to dodge it. The fatal knight added that now nothing was impossible for him and attacked Archlich. The sorcerer did not notice how the sword's blades pierced his body and a powerful wave threw him back. At first, this frightened Archlich and he listened to his senses, but he felt nothing. When nothing happened, the Archlich laughed and said it was normal, and he was right. Such a technique does not exist. His laughter turned into a groan and his jaws opened wide, releasing black energy. The black energy of the Archlich's soul left his body and rose in a whirlwind somewhere into the sky. Leaving the Archlich's body, the energy of his soul rose into the sky and formed thick black clouds. After that, an incredibly powerful explosion occurred, which destroyed the Archlich's soul completely. The Archlich's hideous body fell apart. His skull fell right at the feet of the fatal knight. Looking at the extinguished eyes in the Archlich's skull, the fatal knight said that he should burn in hell. Then he trampled the sorcerer's skull with his foot into tiny pieces, putting all his hatred for the Archlich into this blow. All this was watched by King Howard Adel Light, who was still kneeling among the ruins of the fortress. The king could not understand what had just happened, and why the fatal knight had destroyed his creator. Having finished with the Archlich, the fatal swordsman fell to his knees. Despite the fact that he was also undead, his body was overcome with exhaustion. Sighing, the fatal swordsman said that it was finally over, and then fell silent again. He raised his giant sword and leaned on it. The knight thought that this was not all. His gaze was heavy. Everything the fatal knight had done when the Archlich imprisoned his consciousness flashed before his eyes. The knight thought he would like to tell his family that he was very sorry, but they had all died by his sword. Saying that he was very, very sorry, the fatal knight pierced his body with his own sword. Everything went black. Suddenly, he saw a bright light in the darkness and heard someone calling Damien. It was strange to hear his name after so many years. The voice was very familiar to him. Could it be Louise? He tried to open his eyes. The silhouette of a girl was right in front of him. She called him Damien again and asked why he was sleeping there. There was no mistake. It was his sister. He thought he had managed to see Louise one more time before going to hell. But something was very strange. Damien asked his sister why she looked so young. Laughing at his question, she remarked that he was still the same flatterer, and jokingly asked if he was flattering her again before their father scolded him. Louise said that would be fine. Her older sister would cover for him in front of their father. Then she said that it was about to rain, so he'd better hurry up and go home. His sister got up and quickly ran to the house. Damien was very surprised when he saw his family's estate in front of him. A picture from the past flashed through his mind. The boy said that he had destroyed this estate with his own hands. His hands and body were human again. He looked at himself closely. Damien asked if it was all a dream. Another terrible memory surfaced from his mind. Archlich with his dark magic. The boy thought that perhaps all the terrible things Archlich had done to him were just a nightmare. He couldn't understand what was real and what was a dream. Was everything that happened and everything he felt unreal? Noticing a branch next to him, Damien thought that there was only one way to find out. If it was a dream, then all the knowledge he had gained in it was just an illusion. In that life, he had fought with a knight from whom he had learned an interesting technique. This technique allowed him to multiply the force of his blows. So, finding a suitable stone, Damien decided to try it out. Performing the necessary combination of moves, the boy struck the center of the large stone with his stick. The branch hit the stone and shattered into tiny splinters. Only a small piece remained in Damien's fingers. Holding his breath, the boy waited to see what would happen next and whether the knowledge in his head was real. For a few seconds, he stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the stone, waiting for the result. Suddenly, a slight smile appeared on his face, and he exclaimed that this couldn't be. A hole appeared where he had struck with the branch, and large cracks began to spread across the stone. When the stone completely cracked, the force of the shockwave scattered its pieces around. A shiver ran through his body. Damien began to mutter something slowly but uncertainly under his breath. Damien raised his head, and a slightly strange and wild laugh burst from his chest. Damien's almost hysterical laughter began to subside, and the boy crouched down next to the destroyed stone. He clenched his hand into a fist, so everything that had happened to him was not just a nightmare. The sky had grown completely dark, and as his sister had warned, a thunderstorm had begun. Large raindrops fell on Damien. He was no longer laughing. The cold drops brought him to his senses, and a sob escaped from his chest. He said that it was not really a dream. The raindrops hid his tears. Damien said that he had really returned to the past. Listening to his father's swearing, Damien thought about his talent. The talent to disgrace the family. His father shouted that he had completely lost his mind. He emphasized that he had been kicked out of the tavern because he had caused a disturbance there, and asked how long he would continue to disgrace their family. He remembered how the door to the room suddenly opened, and his brother asked why he had beaten the Marquis de Lionblum's son. His brother yelled that their sister had suffered because of his actions. After all, this scumbag had dragged her along with him. Remembering that incident, Damien thought again about his talent for dragging his family's future into the mire. His mother asked Damien through her tears why he had taken out a loan and mortgaged all their land. She begged him to explain why he had done so. Damien thought again that his talent was also to deprive his loved ones of property and valuables. Because of all his so-called talents, his father kicked him out of the estate and told him not to come back. Louise called out to him and he stopped. His sister told him to take some money with him and handed him a small bag. Smiling sweetly, Louise turned to her brother and asked him to be happy. The boy did not expect such warmth from his sister. After all, he was the one who ruined her life. He stretched out his trembling hand toward the bag of money his sister was holding. Grabbing the bag, the boy ran away so he wouldn't have to look his sister in the eye. On the day he ran away as if fleeing from his family, he understood for the first time what guilt and shame felt like. Now, sitting on the grass under a tree, Damien thought about how he had ended up in the past. He really wanted to apologize to his family, but could he really travel back in time? The rain stopped and bright rays of sunlight broke through the black clouds, gently illuminating the clearing where Damien was sitting. Looking at the sunbeams in the dark, stormy sky, Damien thought it was like divine providence. Feeling his hands tremble, the boy looked at them. It was an ordinary human body. Damien mentally noted that he knew it all along. Even such a technique was beyond his power now. The technique that greatly amplified the shockwave he used was called the destructive swing. With his incredible talent, the Fatal Knight mastered the techniques of other knights simply during battle. He acquired the technique of the destructive swing when he defeated his opponent in a fierce battle. That knight was called the Destroyer of Castle Walls. His thoughts were interrupted by a man who ran out of the estate and shouted that thank God the young master was here. While the man was trying to catch his breath, Damien thought that he looked like one of their servants. But what was his name? Damien began to go through the names in his head and then asked if he was Victor. The servant confirmed this and asked the young lord what he was doing here. After all, Lady Louise had ordered him to return, so why hadn't he obeyed her and was still here? Victor then informed him that his father was furious. Damien chuckled thoughtfully and asked what he had done. The servant replied that he already knew everything, so why was he asking him such questions? Damien went to the estate, still not knowing why his father was so angry with him. Shouts came from Viscount Haxon's estate. He yelled that he was still a brat. In a fit of rage, he swung his sword at Damien, who had already entered his father's study. The Viscount tried to strike, but the boy quickly dodged and jumped out of the way of his attack. The Viscount's anger at his son's actions burned within him, and this insolent act inflamed it even more. His father asked if he had completely lost his mind. After all, he had been kicked out of the tavern for drunken brawling. His sister and mother tried to restrain and calm him down, but the Viscount would not calm down. He asked how long he would continue to disgrace the family. Damien realized at what point in his life he had returned. His father shouted to let him go and give him a chance to break that stupid head of his. His mother replied that she would not let him go and asked if he really intended to kill Damien. His sister Louise asked her father to calm down and think. Looking at his family, he thought about the last time his father had scolded him, and now his mother and sister were here too. He had missed them so much all these years. His body trembled and Damien clenched his fists. Surprised, Paul Osborne Haxon whispered, asking if he was crying. Marilda whispered back, confirming that he had been too harsh. Hiding his sword, his father asked how Damien would justify himself this time, and ordered him to answer if he hadn't swallowed his tongue. The boy replied that he had nothing to say. His father replied, of course, everything is as usual, and he didn't even doubt it. Suddenly, he realized what Damien had said. Paul Osborne looked at his son in surprise and asked if he had nothing to say. Without waiting for an answer, Viscount Haxon exclaimed that this could not be. Someone who always tries to justify himself with pathetic excuses has nothing to say? Damien replied that this was certainly true, but that made it even more painful. Damien said that he had disgraced the Viscountcy of Haxon with his misdeed, and that it was entirely his fault and there was no room for excuses. Viscount Haxon sighed heavily and said that was all he could say. Then he asked if he thought he would let him get away with it. Bowing to his father, Damien said that he would atone for his guilt. This statement surprised Viscount Haxon greatly. The boy headed for the exit and repeated that he would correct his mistakes. Looking back at his father, Damien said that after that he would return and accept his deserved punishment. This response shocked his family. It was completely out of character for him. His father asked him in confusion if he had been hit on the head or something. Damien had ideas on how to make amends for his mistakes, and the boy set off for the trading town of Landwork. When Damien stopped in front of one of the houses, Victor asked in a voice trembling with fear if they had arrived. Victor asked again if he was really going there. The servant said that there were rumors that those guys were led by a criminal organization, so he was very worried that something bad would happen. But the young master just smiled at the servant and said that if he was afraid, he could go back without him. The servant asked anxiously how he could do that. After all, he had to accompany him and couldn't leave. Looking at Victor, Damien told him not to worry. The young man said that he was just going to sincerely apologize to the owner and asked what could happen. Then he added that he had to take responsibility for his mistakes. Stunned by this statement, Victor thought that he would like to believe that everything would work out. Damien did not know how he had managed to get into the past. He thought that maybe God was giving him another chance. But in any case, the young man could not allow himself to hurt his loved ones again. Clenching his fists, Damien thought that he would fix everything he had done step by step. The thugs standing at the entrance recognized the guy walking straight towards them. His appearance surprised them. One of them asked the young man why the hell he had returned. Then another added that they had warned him not to show his face again. The young man thought that so much time had passed that he had already begun to forget, but those guys looked familiar somehow. Damien said he wanted to apologize to the owner for what he had done last time. For a moment, the thugs froze in surprise because the young man's behavior was completely opposite to what they expected. One of them began to snort, stifling his laughter, and muttered, "Just look at him, he's such a gentleman." The other asked if he wanted to apologize and added that he would pass it on to the owner. The bandit noted that something was unusual. After all, the young man was known as the uncouth eldest son of a poor family. However, he turned out to be better than they thought. The second added that there was also a rumor that the young lady from his family was a rare beauty. Then the second remarked that it turned out that the family was not entirely hopeless. The man patted Damien on the cheek and said that he suddenly wanted to accept his apology. He added that he would forgive him on the condition that he introduce him to his lovely sister. His partner laughed and remarked that the young man would now cry. But Damien thought that this could certainly add to the difficulty, yet instantly snatched the knife from the gangster's hands. Spinning the knife, Damien said he thought he could handle it. He would just apologize and go home. The bandit called Damien a snot-nosed kid and ordered him to return the knife immediately. But the boy said that he had probably overestimated himself. Then the bandit asked what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Damien's patience ran out and he instantly cut off the defiant man's hand. The man didn't immediately understand what had happened, but a second later, pain pierced his body and he howled in agony. Damien said that since they had asked for it, there was nothing they could do about it. While his partner was howling in pain, another gangster grabbed the sword. Then the young man said he would show them what the eldest son of the Haxon family was really like. Victor, the servant, quietly watched the situation from behind the nearest wall. Seeing how things were going, Victor thought that the boy wanted to fix what he had done. A couple of guys were passing by and noticed what was happening, but decided not to interfere and not to look for trouble. Pointing his sword at the young man, the bandit asked if he even knew who they were. Damien replied that he didn't care and added that it was time to wrap things up. Showing his tattoo, the bandit shouted that it was arrogant and threatened that anyone who messed with the Black Snake would not get away so easily. Hearing the name Black Snake, Damien began to remember what kind of group it was. The Black Snake was a criminal organization that was strengthening its influence in landwork at that time, and that tavern belonged to them. When he was given the bill, the prices were too high. When he said he wouldn't pay the inflated prices, they beat him up and mocked him in front of the crowd. It occurred to Damien that if he thought about it carefully, they should apologize to him. The bandit asked why he was smiling like that, but he immediately shouted that he didn't care and emphasized that the guy shouldn't think that he would pat him on the head for his noble origins. The bandit shouted and immediately attacked the young man, but he quickly dodged the attack. In addition, he managed to trip his attacker, who lost his balance. The bandit fell face down on the ground and howled loudly in pain. Damien said that, to be honest, simply destroying them would not be enough. But for the sake of his family, he would restrain himself. The young man put the knife to the gangster's leg. After punishing the insolent men, Damien wiped the blood from his face. Someone behind him asked who this scumbag was. Looking back, Damien saw several more gangsters who had suddenly approached the house. One of them asked his companions if he was from some gang. Then another asked the guy whose gang he was from. The guy replied that he was not. He had come to apologize, but suddenly realized that they were the ones who should apologize to him. Damien said he wanted to leave a complaint with the owner and ordered them to take him to him. The man shouted that this was nonsense and that he did not understand what he was talking about, and if he did not want to answer, they would simply beat the nonsense out of him. Pointing his finger at the young man, the man ordered his henchmen to take him away. The bandits immediately rushed to carry out the order and ran towards the young man with their swords drawn. Sighing, Damien asked what kind of attack this was and ran towards the heavily armed bandits with a single knife. He quickly slipped between all the bandits, cutting off their hands with his knife. The guy only stopped in front of the one who had given the order to capture him. The latter stood with his mouth open in surprise. Damien muttered that even this was enough to take his breath away. Then he asked the bandit if they would continue. The bandit immediately refused and emphasized that he was sorry, and that he was very sorry. But Damien was not satisfied with this answer and chased after the bandit who had started to run away, and he caught up with him. The tavern was quite crowded that day, and all the tables were occupied. The waitress could barely keep up with taking and delivering orders. All the visitors froze when the tavern door suddenly opened and a man appeared. The man's head was clearly twisted to the side and a knife glinted near his throat. Letting him go, Damien said that he had obviously gone too far, but that he should have listened while he was still good. The man's body fell to the floor and the bloodied Damien looked terrifying in the shadow of the door. So when he entered the tavern, all the patrons began screaming and running out into the street. In a matter of seconds, the tavern was empty. Damien thought that was good and that now no one would interfere. A man appeared on the balcony of the upper floor of the tavern and asked what all the noise was about. Noticing that the hall was empty, the tavern owner, Anderson Home, indignantly asked where his guards had gone. Damien shouted that here was the tavern owner. The young man said that if he was talking about the guys who had been dragged out, he had already dealt with them. Noticing one of the guys lying on the floor near the entrance, Anderson thought that he must have defeated the guys from the Dark Snake. He shouted, asking who this guy was to cause trouble in someone else's establishment. The guy replied that his name was Damien Haxon. Then Anderson asked if he was the Haxon from the window. The guy confirmed it and said he came not to cause trouble but to get an apology. Anderson was outraged and asked what apology he was talking about. Damien said that the prices in this place were too high, so he complained about it and his people beat him up and threw him out onto the street. And now, because of this ridiculous situation, people think he is some kind of drunkard and troublemaker. Damien added that the main thing was that as a result, he and his family had lost a lot. Anderson asked what they had lost. Then he suggested that perhaps the young man was talking about honor. He added that he was probably too old to understand his words. A sly smile appeared on Anderson's face, and he said that he had heard that the Haxems had nothing left to lose and no honor left. He then called the boy a stupid nobleman and asked if he really thought that he would apologize at the first request. But he had had enough of this empty talk, and the boy had to pay for ruining his business. Smiling, Damien said that everything was clear. He said that at first he really wanted to accept the apology, but if that's how he wanted to do business, then so be it. Before the nobleman could blink, Damien took a few jumps and reached the balcony. Wielding a knife at the tavern owner, Damien said that he also had to pay for his words. But suddenly, someone else appeared between them. He easily deflected the boy's attack. Damien noticed that he had a strong aura, which he did not expect. Anderson called the man in armor Sir Ted and noticed that he had arrived just in time. Damien exclaimed that it was quite a surprise and remarked that he didn't think someone like him would enjoy working in such a place. Damien then asked for an explanation as to what a knight was doing in such a place. Knights are those who follow the path of martial arts and devote their entire lives to them. There are several levels of knightly mastery: page, squire, and official knight. They are assigned ranks depending on their level of mastery. Official knights are capable of unleashing an aura, cutting through mountains with a single blow, and destroying castle walls as if they were no stronger than paper. Their essence is beyond human understanding. Anderson asked if he was already scared. He said that Ted was a squire and that he was quite close to the head of the Dark Serpent, so he and his family could already be considered dead. Damien said that so he was the squire. That was why he felt so little aura in him. Ted wondered how the guy managed to sense an aura that he hadn't even materialized. Damien chuckled and added that now there was no question why someone like him worked in such a place. Damien then said that he had probably been expelled from the squire school due to a lack of the skills necessary to become a knight. Anderson turned to Ted and asked how much he would take to deal with the guy. Ted growled that they would discuss the price later and that first he would rip out the boy's tongue. Ted immediately set out to attack the boy. His sword was almost at the boy's head, but the boy jumped back. Therefore, the full force of the blow fell on the tavern floor. Quickly pulling his sword out of the broken floor, Knight Ted looked at the insolent boy. The knight made several more attempts, but the boy dodged them all. Damien mentally noted that he was quite capable for a squire. He moved sweepingly but attacked accurately. This attack was the same. Damien managed to jump back again and avoid the blade of the sword. Damien felt that he was already on the verge and that his body was not in great shape. He thought that he should focus on endurance first. Knight Ted was annoyed that the boy was able to dodge. Calling him a brat, Ted threatened that he would see how he could dodge this attack. As soon as he began his attack, Damien recognized his technique. It was a secret technique. The sword was almost touching the boy, and Damien decided that he would have to use a similar technique to fight back. He had learned this technique when he met the legendary mercenary, the master of the Fatal Blade, the Phantom Assassin. When they met, the Phantom Assassin ordered him to get out of the forest if he valued his life. But the Fatal Knight did not move. Then the Phantom Assassin said that he didn't seem to understand, and added that in that case, he would have to finish off one more person. He said he would show him his secret technique since he had asked for it. The Phantom Assassin said that he could see that the human body was mostly made up of water. And if you reach that level, you can cut a person in half, even with a wooden sword. Using the secret technique of the Fatal Blade, the Phantom Assassin cut the knight's body in two. After that, he realized that he should have left when he had the chance. Hearing a movement behind him, the Phantom Assassin looked back. He noticed that the knight had risen. The assassin exclaimed that this was impossible since he had cut him down. Damn it, don't tell me he's undead. Using his talent for learning and repeating techniques from a single viewing, the Fatal Knight mastered it. He didn't even draw his sword to cut down the Phantom Assassin. He did it with his bare hands. The assassin only had time to ask how he was able to replicate his secret technique before his severed body fell to the ground. Sir Ted fell to the floor without even understanding what had happened the moment he attacked the boy. Damien thought it was always like that. None of his enemies could believe how he had finished them off. After he became the Fatal Knight, he gained a wonderful ability. He began to absorb and acquire the skills of his enemies. Just a moment ago, the tavern owner's satisfied face contorted with surprise and fear. Together with his bandits, they bowed their heads before the boy. Anderson said that they apologized for their disrespect to the great Haxan. Anderson pointed to the monetary reward and asked if it would be enough for him to forgive them. Thinking that at first he just wanted them to apologize to him, but it seemed worth accepting the reward, Damien said that it was not enough, but he would forgive them for the first time. Looking at the door, Damien asked what he was doing and ordered him to come over and start packing. Damien called out loudly to Victor, who only then looked in the door and said he was listening to the young master. As he packed up the reward, Victor thought that he would never have believed it if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. It was incredibly shocking. When did the young master learn such a technique? Anderson and the guards escorted them to the exit and bowed, wishing them a safe journey. Victor told the young gentleman that he had never seen so much money in his life. Watching them carry his money away, Anderson thought that he would definitely get every last penny back from this brat. He decided to tell the Dark Snake about it, and then the boy would be finished. At that moment, he heard a whistle and felt pain. Damien said that because of the money, he had almost forgotten about the punishment. Anderson screamed that he had cut off his ear. The boy told him to tell the Dark Snake that if they even touched his family, he would not leave them alone. Anderson trembled with pain and fear. but in his mind he promised that this brat would pay for everything. When they left that street, the sun was already beginning to set. Finally, the day was coming to an end. Damien Haxon knew perfectly well that this would not atone for his sins against his family. He looked at the sunset and thought that in his new life he would no longer disappoint his family. This thought warmed his soul, and he happily told Victor that they were going home. Victor was equally happy to support his young master. That evening, a rather interesting conversation took place between the brothers at the Leon Bloom estate. The boy asked his brother if he had ever heard the expression, "Pain always goes hand in hand with love." The latter asked what he meant and remarked that he looked so serious, as if he were about to fight someone. Young Lionbloom denied this and told his brother that he was going to find love. They returned to the Haxon estate only in the morning and quietly entered the house. Yawning sweetly, Damien told Victor that he hadn't slept so well in a long time. Victor replied that he envied him and said that he had not been able to sleep all night because of what had happened yesterday. Damien said that at first he cut off his hands, then his legs, but in the end everything worked out. Of course, at first everything did not go according to plan, but in the end they received a handsome reward. He added that soon rumors would spread that someone in the tavern had messed with Haken and paid for it. After that, people would start to take their family seriously. Victor thought that the guy seemed to be well aware of his reputation. Victor said that all this was wonderful, of course, but he was worried about the Black Serpent. After all, the gentleman had dealt cruelly not only with the members of that organization, but also with the armorer they had hired. Damien replied that no matter how insolent they were, they would not dare to attack a noble family. And even if they did, he would stop them, so there was no need to worry. The servant said that, to be honest, even in his opinion, the master's skill with a sword was very unusual. Then he asked when the young master had learned to wield a sword so well. Damien looked away a little embarrassed and replied that he just practiced from time to time. Suddenly, he heard his father shout his name. Damien looked back and saw that he was already heading towards him. Viscount Haken was clearly angry and, calling Damien a brat, asked where he had been wandering all day yesterday. Grabbing his son by the shoulders, Paul Osborne shook him and asked if he had gotten himself into trouble again. Damien told his father not to worry and, smiling, ordered Victor to show him. The servant obeyed and untied a large bag full of gold coins. Seeing so much money, Marilda Haxon almost fainted. Along with the money, the boy had obtained documents proving his right to own the land and informed the Haxons about it. The young man said that he had returned to the tavern from which he had been thrown out and cleared up the misunderstanding. As it turned out, he was not to blame, and the tavern owner gave him this as compensation. Paul Osborne picked up his wife and asked his son if he could really believe him. Marilda beat her son to it and said she didn't think he was lying. Otherwise, where would he have gotten so much money? Then Damien said that if his father didn't believe him, he could ask Victor because he had seen everything. Winking at his servant, Damien asked Victor if he was telling the truth. Victor confirmed it. Damien asked if his father now believed him. His father hummed thoughtfully. Then Marilda turned to her husband and said that their son was not lying. While they were talking happily, Victor thought about how the young master lied as easily as he breathed. Deciding that he needed to train, Damien did not put off his plan. He began his first training session with a run. Feeling that it was difficult to breathe, the boy stopped. Damien thought that he had trained very little but was already out of breath. His body was very slow and weak. You can't do much in this condition, but it was very good that he managed to get the potion. Damien took a small bottle out of his pocket. Seeing it among the other valuable items, Damien asked what it was. Anderson replied that it was a potion to increase energy and endurance. It was created at the School of Alchemy. When the boy looked at the tavern owner in surprise, he explained that it was a group of alchemists who specialized in creating potions and elixirs. Then Damien remembered hearing that their elixirs were as expensive as precious stones. Thinking that he was a lucky guy, Damien drank the precious potion from the bottle. In a few minutes, the young man felt strength spreading through his body. Damien thought that the potion was working perfectly. The boy knew that if he wanted to become stronger, he needed to develop his endurance quickly. He wanted to reach the same level he had in his past life as quickly as possible, because in a few years that bastard Archlich Dorgo would summon the undead into this world. And Damien wanted to become stronger by that time so that he could finish off the Archlich again. The boy understood that only when he had great strength would he be able to protect his family's happiness. Deciding that this time he would definitely finish off Dorgo, Damien began training again. On one of the streets of Landwork, a tall tower served as a hideout for the Black Snake organization. Chewing on a piece of meat, he muttered that it was useless, and he was the best of those they hired. What a disaster! The gangsters asked their boss what they should do with Ted now. Should they cure him, or what? The head of the Black Snake, Cedric Walker, threw away the bone and said there was no need, and ordered them to just throw him away. The men were surprised and cautiously asked if the boss was sure. He replied that he was and told them to throw him somewhere. Cedric Walker headed for the exit. On the way, he said that Ted was now useless to them, and for a sufficient amount of money, they could buy anyone they wanted. Suddenly, he heard Ted's voice saying, "That's it." Ted's rise was quite unexpected for everyone. Turning to Ted, Cedric exclaimed in surprise that he could still move. Smiling, the head of the Dark Serpent asked him what he thought of the idea. They would cure him and he might hire him again. Ted could no longer restrain himself and shouted for him to go to hell. With these words, he rushed at Cedric with his sword. Then some strange black matter began to wrap around his legs and arms, preventing him from moving. Frightened, Ted couldn't break free from his captivity and asked what was going on. A magician appeared in the room and addressed the head of the Dark Serpent. He asked if he could use Ted as the first victim of their agreement. The leader replied that of course he could. This was an opportunity to see what he was capable of. Ted shouted for the magician to release him immediately. The dark magician immediately began whispering some spells, and the black matter began to move actively. It turned into some shapeless creatures that only had mouths with huge teeth. One of the creatures opened its mouth wide in front of Ted, and he asked in a frightened voice what the hell this was. The next moment, all the creatures began to tear the body to pieces, happily feasting on human flesh. Only one dirty boot remained of Ted lying on the floor. Cedric covered his nose and said it was disgusting. The mage asked if the head of the dark serpent was satisfied. He replied that he was and asked that next time he do without the dirt. The satisfied magician replied that he understood and asked what the next target would be. Remembering why Cedric had called him, he said that someone had caused damage to his organization, but that person was a noble, so it would not be easy to deal with. Smiling, Cedric told him to make sure the guy suffered, and the more he suffered, the more the magician would get. The head of the dark serpent handed the mage a bag of money and said that it was only in advance. Taking the large bag of gold, the mage said with satisfaction that he would take care of it and thanked him. It was difficult for Demian to breathe, but he did not give up training and stubbornly pursued his goal. Today he trained very hard. Demian squatted with a stick to which he tied heavy bags to make the task more difficult. After finishing the exercise, the young man touched his muscles and noticed that the potion was working well. Over the past few days, his endurance had improved significantly. Reaching for a bottle of water, Demian thought that it seemed a little strange. After all, nothing had happened in all that time, and he was sure that the people from Dark Snake would come for him. The young man noticed that something had frightened the birds, and then he heard a rustle in the bushes. Demian thought he knew what it was. Demian quickly jumped up to the bushes and grabbed the man who was hiding there, watching him. He was very surprised when he saw that he had pulled his brother Abel out of the bushes by the neck. Realizing that it was his younger brother, Demian let go of the boy's neck, and he immediately fell to the ground. Abel Haxon noticed that his brother had become much stronger during the time they had not seen each other. He added that he had thought his brother was going to break his neck. When Demian heard these words, he remembered that when he was the fatal knight, that was exactly what had happened. He had torn off Abel's head with his own hands. Reaching out his hand to his brother, Demian said he didn't want to hurt him and asked for forgiveness. But his brother did not take his hand and, turning away, said that he had not come here for an apology. He said that their father had told him that the tavern owner had apologized to Demian, but he had discovered that there had been a fight and many people had been injured. Giving his brother a suspicious look, Abel said that it couldn't have been his doing. Then he asked if he had lied to their father. Demian replied that it was all true and said that he had beaten them with his own hands. Abel exploded and shouted that he didn't even know how to fight. He demanded that he admit that he had hired someone to do it. When Demian denied it, Abel shouted for him to stop lying. Maybe he could fool others, but not him. His brother emphasized that in any case, he dared not do anything that could disgrace their family. He asked if Demian even knew how much effort they had put into cleaning up after him. Demian patted his brother on the head and thought to himself that Abel had always been so righteous and wanted only the best for their family. When Abel indignantly began to pull his hand away, Demian laughed and told his brother not to worry. Everything would be fine now. Victor appeared in the courtyard of the estate, rushing towards the brothers at full speed and calling out to them. Victor said he had bad news. The smile immediately disappeared from Damian's face. Hearing the news from his servant, Demian rushed to the guest hall of the estate. The young Marquis Lionbloom was drinking tea in the hall. Seeing his son, Paul Haxon shouted his name menacingly. Putting down his cup, Lionbloom asked if he was also here. Then he said that he was here to tell the Viscount about the latest incident in the banquet hall. With a sly smile, Lionbloom said he apologized for such a sudden visit. He added that he really couldn't do anything, because his father had found out everything. Demian cursed silently, and he kept wondering if he had already gotten himself involved in this story with him. Irvin Lionbloom gave Demian a sly look and asked if he had forgotten about that incident. That day, they had bumped into each other at a ball. Demian indignantly asked what he had just said. The Marquis replied that he had meant no harm and apologized if he had offended him. The young man shouted that he had not only offended him but also disgraced his sister, and now he claims he is not guilty. Lionbaum said that he had drunk too much and asked when he had said something like that. Then he whispered in Damian's ear that he was a fool, and even if he had said it, it didn't change anything. Damian thought that he shouldn't have fallen for Lionbloom's provocation, but then he couldn't help himself and hit him hard. It was strange that a man who had almost become a knight had missed a blow from someone like him. What was he thinking then? He clenched his fists when his father asked the Marquis what they should do now to make amends to him. The latter replied that he was naturally uncomfortable talking about it, but he had always admired Lady Louise. Paul Haxon asked what he meant. Then the Marquis of Lionbloom asked them to give their consent. His face became predatory and he repeated that he was asking Viscount Haxon to consent to his marriage to Louise. Damian thought that here he was again. In his past life, he had done exactly the same thing by pressuring them financially. Lionbloom said that if they agreed, they would reduce it all to a simple family misunderstanding. Then everyone would just have to pretend that nothing had happened. Viscount Haxon replied that they could not do that. Louise already had a fiancé, so it was unacceptable. Without hiding his dissatisfaction, Lionbloom asked what would happen to his insult. Was their estate really ready to face the wrath of his family? The young Marquis Leonbloom gave Viscount Haxon a choice. Either they had to compensate the Lionblooms for the damage to their honor, or give him preference as his daughter's fiancé. Paul Haxon thought that the Lionbloom family was one of the most influential families in the kingdom, but how could he allow his daughter to marry such a notorious libertine? Suddenly a woman's voice said, "All right." Louise Haxon appeared in the doorway of the guest room. Taking a few steps forward, she announced that she accepted the Marquis de Leonbloom's proposal. Viscount Haxon indignantly asked what she was talking about. Her mother added that if they waited a little longer, they would find a solution. Abel joined the conversation and shouted that she should not make up for her brother's guilt. Damien noticed how his sister was barely holding back her trembling. He felt very sorry and ashamed in front of his sister. Because of him, she had sacrificed herself again. Louise smiled and said that she was fine. Then she repeated that she agreed to marry Mr. Irwin. Irwin Lionbloom smiled, thinking that this was wonderful. Standing up, he remarked that Mrs. Louise was truly wise. He went to Louise and said that he would send them an official letter with the proposal very soon. Then they would discuss all the details. Marquis Leonbloom had almost reached his sister when Damien blocked his way. He asked if Damien had anything to say. Then, patting him on the shoulder, he asked if he could now call him his brother-in-law. Damien thought he was a stupid clown. He had ruined his sister's life in his previous life, and now he was doing it again. Damien didn't mince words and rudely refused the Marquis Leonbloom. Louise was shocked by her brother's behavior. Irwin Lionbloom sarcastically asked him to repeat what he had just said, as he hadn't quite heard him. No longer able to contain his anger, Damien Haxon gave the arrogant Marquis a good punch. The young man thought again that he should not have succumbed to his provocation for the sake of his family and their relatives. Watching the Marquis fly across half the room, Damien thought that he couldn't do anything else. Damien Haxon called Irwin Lionbloom an asshole and repeated that he was saying no. The servants informed the young master that the carriage of Mrs. Louise and Mr. Irwin had arrived. It seemed as if they hadn't seen each other in 100 years. He missed his sister very much, so with thoughts of how long it had been since they had seen each other, Damien ran to his sister. Happy to see his sister, he peeked through the half-open door and wanted to call out to her. But the smile immediately disappeared from his face when he saw how Lionbaum was treating his sister. Grabbing her by the hair, he said that she had been whining for so long, and now he had brought her home. And what was the result? Irwin said that her worthless family had sold her for a pittance, and she dared to say she would leave him? Throwing his wife to the floor, Irwin Lionbloom sighed and said that she was his beloved Louise. Putting on a leather glove, he said that he would raise her properly so that in the future she would not even dare to mention such a thing. Damien saw Irwin beating his sister, and Louise silently endured her husband's beatings. The boy fell to his knees, horrified by the realization that it was all his fault. It was because of him that his sister ended up in Lionbloom's hands. Then he thought that he would never forgive that damn scumbag Irwin Lionbloom. And that's why, after hitting the marca, Damien Haxon shouted that this time the bastard wouldn't get away with it. From Damien's unexpected blow, the young Marquis fell to the floor in front of the table. A guard looked into the room and asked what the noise was. Seeing the Marquis on the floor, he immediately grabbed his sword. Everyone was stunned by what had happened, so Damien just looked at the men. He guessed that they were the Marquis's guards. Drawing their swords, the guards asked if he had wounded their young master. Hysterical laughter rang out in the room. Irwin Lionbloom sat down and asked how he dared. Pulling out his sword, Irwin asked again how he dared to hit him in the face a second time. The Haxons were terrified for their son when they saw that Lionbloom was determined to shed blood. Irwin Lionbloom noted that his brother-in-law was probably looking for a way to end his life. The guard asked the young Marquis to calm down and emphasized that they would sort it out themselves. But the enraged young Marquis Leonbloom gritted his teeth and ordered the guards to leave. The guard wanted to argue with the young master and emphasized that he would not give such a rude person a chance. He did not even have time to finish speaking when the Marquis Leonbloom struck him a powerful blow. He then turned to the second guard and repeated his order to leave. Approaching him, Lionbloom said that he was asking Damien Haxon again. How did he plan to resolve this situation? Concerned for her brother, Louise thought that Irwin would never leave Damien alone. The girl stepped forward again and shouted that she begged them to stop. But Damien didn't let her say another word. He stopped Louise before she could do so. Looking at his sister, Damien assured her that everything was fine and that he would take care of it himself. He added mentally that she had sacrificed enough for him. Damien announced that he proposed to settle the matter in a duel. Lionbloom was outraged when he heard about the duel. Then Damien said that if he won the sword duel, he would do whatever he wanted. And if he won, he would forget everything that had happened up to that point. Irwin Lionbloom replied that under such conditions, there was no point in participating in such nonsense. Besides, Mrs. Louise had already given her consent. Smiling, Damien asked why he had suddenly started looking for excuses. Was he afraid of losing to him? He gritted his teeth and thought that Haxon was a pompous jerk. He punched him secretly and imagined himself to be something unknown. And he was racking his brains trying to figure out how to make him pay. And here everything had turned out so perfectly. He decided to take advantage of the opportunity to cripple Damien for life and then take his sister away. So Irwin announced that he accepted his challenge to a duel. Everyone went to the backyard of the estate to stage the duel there. Marilda asked her husband if they should intervene. Viscount Haken replied that judging by how confident Damien was acting, he must have some kind of plan, and if not, then they would just have to believe in a miracle. Abel thought his father was very much mistaken. There was no point in hoping for a miracle. After all, Erwin Lionbloom had apparently already officially attained the rank of knight. Damien had no chance against him. Erwin asked if he was ready to begin and inquired how he intended to fight him without a sword. Damien replied that he should not worry. Taking out a fork, Damien said that it would be enough to deal with him. When the Marquis saw the fork, he froze in surprise at first, but a few seconds later he burst out laughing. After calming down a little, Lionbloom said that it seemed like he had really lost his mind out of fear. Damien Haxon shouted that he wasn't going to mess around with him. Eric immediately began to attack him, but Damien quickly jumped out of the way of Lionbloom's aim and dodged the blow. Marcus Leon Bloom was surprised that he managed to dodge. He decided that it was worth moving on to more complex attacks right away. So he used his family's technique, the Blade of the Lion's Roar, to attack. They only had time to see the dust rise around Damien as Erwin flew at him with his sword. The dust settled, and it became clear that Damien was still standing firmly with the fork in his hands. Lionbloom's guards couldn't believe that the boy was still intact at this point, and didn't understand what was happening. Eric thought that in a brief moment he had managed to dodge all the main attacks of his fierce lion's roar technique. Damien noticed that he was stunned. Of course, his persistent training in recent days played a part in this, but the main reason was that he had long since mastered the Lionbloom technique. He had learned this technique from Michael Lionbloom. Before returning to the past, he had already fought with his brother, and Erwin turned out to be much weaker than his brother. Damien noticed how his hands were shaking from the tension. Lionbloom shouted that fools are lucky and added that he would see how he could dodge this. Seeing that he had released his aura, Damien thought that the Holy Sword technique would be best in this situation. The blow with the use of the aura was quite powerful, but Damien's technique was no weaker. Abel didn't even notice his mouth opening in surprise. He didn't even expect his brother to withstand the first attack. Damien blocked the attack by grabbing the sword with a fork. Erwin asked in surprise what the hell was going on. The boy simply twisted the sword with the fork without any unnecessary movements or fuss. Then he used the secret technique of myriad streams leading to the source. With this technique, he disarmed Lionbloom in an instant, and aiming the fork at him, said goodbye. With one sharp movement, he stabbed the fork into the neck of Erwin Lionbloom, whom he hated so much. Damien Haxon's parents were amazed at how strong their son had become. Marquis Leon Bloom's guards were frightened when they saw what had happened to the young gentleman. The fork pierced Erwin Lionbloom's skin and blood flowed hotly down his neck. Damien took the fork and Erwin fell to the ground clutching his wounded neck. He thought that even if he killed him 1,000 times for what he had done, it would hardly be enough. Today he would let him off the hook, but only for the sake of his family. So Damien said that the winner was obvious and asked if Erwin agreed. Lionbloom groaned in pain. The boy emphasized that now, as he had promised, Marquis Leon Bloom had to leave. The whole family gathered together for breakfast, but during breakfast, no one said a word. After breakfast, Damien thanked everyone for the delicious food and said that it was time for him to go to his morning training. Viscount Hackens silently watched his son, who had hurriedly finished his breakfast and left the room. Noticing his gaze, Mirinda turned to her husband and asked if he was going to talk to Damien about what had happened yesterday. Abel muttered that he still did not understand how his brother, who had been as weak as he was, had suddenly become so strong. It was as if he had turned into a different person overnight. Marilda whispered to her husband that Abel seemed to be in shock as well. She noted that he should ask, but Paul Haxon shouted that enough was enough. He said that they would not pressure Damien, and that he would tell them what happened when the time came. Paul Haxon thought he was burning with curiosity himself, but something told him not to ask questions. Damien was his son, but damn it, he was scary. For today's training, Damien had prepared 10-kilogram sandbags, which he attached to his feet. After attaching the bags, the boy said that everything was ready and they could start. Suddenly, he heard someone calling him and turned around. Louise approached him and said that, thank God, he hadn't left yet. She said she wanted to talk about yesterday's events. Hearing this from his sister, Damien thought that he should apologize to her. So, bowing low, Damien told his sister that he was very sorry. After all, he had acted thoughtlessly and put her in a difficult position. He noted that he should have apologized earlier, and in the future, he would do everything to prevent such a situation from happening again. Damien was surprised when Louise put her hand on his shoulder and said that was not the issue. The boy looked at his sister. Smiling at Damien, Louise thanked him. She said that, to be honest, she was really scared. Although she said she would go with Erwin, her heart kept saying no. Damien thought that this was how she felt at that moment. He felt her hands tremble. Louise continued that he had stood up for her. She felt ashamed and happy at the same time. She wiped a tear from her eye and said that was why she wanted to thank him. But Damien stopped her and said that he was the one who should thank her. Smiling, he said he was grateful to his sister for everything. He noticed that his sister did not understand what was happening. So, embarrassed, he quickly turned away and said he had to go. Louise called her brother back and told him to take it. Damien asked if it wasn't the only thing her father cherished more than anything else in the world. Laughing, Louise said that their father had ordered her to give him the sword so that he could use it for his training. Damien was surprised, and Louise noted that their father was not good at showing his feelings, but he really loved him. She said that her father had also asked her to convey these words and quoted him. After all, the blood of Viscounts flows in his veins. Remember this and never use a fork instead of a sword again. Damien felt as if his father himself were looking at him. Looking at the sword his father had given him, Damien silently thanked him. The full moon softly illuminated the Haxon estate when the dark mage appeared before him. One of the guards was struggling to stay awake on duty. He yawned repeatedly and his partner laughed at him. He did not notice how the dark matter reached his feet and began to rise up his body. The guard did not realize how the dark matter took possession of his body and he could no longer control it. The gates of the Haxan estate opened quietly and he calmly entered the grounds. The dark magician headed for the house. The dark matter enveloped his body like a cloak. The candles flickered in the corridors of the estate as the dark magician passed by them and headed for the door of the room. In the first room he looked into, the younger son of the Haxan family, Abel, was sleeping peacefully. Then he continued down the corridor and looked into the next door. There was the room of the Haxan couple. The dark mage approached the next door and stopped in front of it. It was Louise Haxan's room. He entered the room where the girl was sleeping and stopped by her bed. The mage heard that the young Mrs. Haxan was quite beautiful. Looking at her face, the dark magician laughed and said that she was indeed a beauty. The mage thought that he was only here on behalf of the Dark Snake Gang, but he was incredibly lucky. His dirty thoughts were interrupted by a voice that suddenly sounded behind him. Damien was already standing in the open doorway. The boy asked the magician what the hell he was doing here. Damien said that he had come here after sensing a strange energy, and it seemed that an uninvited guest had indeed found his way to them. The dark mage thought that his magic was supposed to put everyone to sleep, so why didn't it work on him? And he didn't even notice his presence even though the boy had come so close. Turning quickly and sharply, the dark magician attacked the boy with magic, but Damien jumped back just as quickly and the mage failed to hit the boy. The mage cursed and called the boy a bastard. Then he asked who he was. The boy replied that he had the same question for him and added that if he didn't know, this was his home. The mage asked if he was Damien Haxan. Damien confirmed this and said that now the magician had to tell him his name. He also had to explain what he had just tried to do to his sister. They heard someone ask what the noise was. Someone noticed that the sound was coming from Mrs. Louise's room. The man shouted that they needed to hurry and check it out. The magician thought that the servants had probably been disturbed by the sound of an explosion. The magician said that a crowd of people would soon gather here, so it was time for him to leave. There was nothing he could do. He was enveloped in black matter, and the magician, as if dissolving into it, slipped out of the open window. Damien Haxan immediately ran after him, and looking out the window, shouted for him to stop. The dark matter moved very quickly with the magician and began to disappear somewhere among the trees. The boy was disappointed that the magician had managed to escape, but suddenly he noticed some of the energy that had come from the magician. At dawn, the servants began their usual chores at the estate. From the stables, they heard that something was wrong. They went to feed the animals in the morning, but an unpleasant surprise awaited them there. The servant asked what they should do now. The servant noticed that the horse, which the Viscount adored, had died. How could he report this to him now? The Viscount would surely be furious. He shouted that this was absurd. The horse was fine yesterday evening. Another said that there was nothing to say, and that he also did not know how this could have happened. Damien Haxan suddenly appeared behind them and said that he had a bad feeling. The servants were immediately frightened. Damien told them not to panic and said he just wanted to make sure of something. He wasn't going to look for someone to blame. The young man asked the servants to leave for a short while. The servants were surprised by this request. When the boy was left alone with the horse, he put his hand on its body to feel the remaining energy. He thought that the energy trail of the man he had let escape the previous night had led him to the stable where they had found the dead horse. Damien had no doubt that this was sinister energy, or more precisely, dark mana. This meant that the man was none other than a dark mage, and it seemed that his family did not know about it yet. Damien decided that there was no need to disturb them for now. Looking around, the boy noticed that the trail stretched from the stable and continued across the field. The trail of dark energy stretched all the way to the entrance of an inconspicuous cave hidden among the trees and bushes. That was his lair. Sorting through and examining the supplies in the cart, the dark mage laughed contentedly. The mage exclaimed that the leader of that gang, Dark Snake, or whatever his name was a complete idiot. After all, he had gathered everything he had asked for. He had to lie to the gang leader that he needed these ingredients for a curse, and the latter believed him. With such supplies, he would definitely be able to complete his experiments. Sighing, the mage exclaimed that he had come to this. He had to fulfill pathetic orders for the sake of some money. The mage thought that although the church was always on his tail, he simply had no other choice. When the dark magician said that he would have to lie low for now, he heard footsteps. The guy exclaimed that it already stank in here. The magician looked back and froze for a moment in surprise. He said that this was precisely why old people should not lead a reclusive life within four walls, and then he advised him to at least occasionally air out his cave. The magician groaned that it was the same eldest son of Viscount Haxan again. The dark magician asked how he managed to find this place. The boy replied that he followed the stench that the boy left behind. The latter was indignant and said that although he had heard that the boy had recklessly gone against the dark serpent, it seemed that the brat had some kind of plan. Damien said he knew something was wrong here and that the boy was probably a mercenary from that gang. The mage said that they had ordered him to inflict as much harm as possible on his family. Smiling, Damien said that was a pity. He noted that the man had taken on a worthless job and now, because of it, would lose his life. The dark magician was indignant at first, but then noticed that the boy was so funny. He exclaimed that if he caught him and tortured him thoroughly, the boy would make an excellent slave. He would entertain him. Grabbing his sword, Damien said he was sorry, but it wouldn't work. He had promised himself that in this life he would not destroy anyone unless absolutely necessary. Taking out his sword, Damien emphasized that there was only one thing. all vile magicians like him must disappear from the face of the earth. The dark mage asked how much he knew. Then he exclaimed that he simply had to get rid of them all. No one should find out. So the boy had to be silenced forever. The mage immediately used his magic. He began to attack the boy with magic, but the boy was able to dodge all his attacks. In a matter of seconds, the boy reached the dark mage. The mage mentally noted that the boy was fast. Damian Haxon cut the dark mage's body in two with one powerful blow, but the parts of the body that were enveloped in dark energy began to pull toward each other. The boy was not very surprised when he saw that the mage's body was regenerating. It was the same ability he had seen before. He thought that the mage was too strong for an ordinary mercenary who had taken on dirty work. The dark mage laughed and said that such pathetic attacks would not harm him. Then, saying that he would chop him up until there was nothing left of him, Damian attacked again. The mage said that wasn't bad. No wonder his name had been on everyone's lips lately, but it wouldn't work. After that, the mage said that by voluntarily entering this place, the boy had sealed his own fate. Feeling something grab his arm, Damian looked back. Dark, toothy monsters were targeting him. The magician said that he had cast a spell everywhere to throw the church off the trail. Seeing a large number of dark monsters, Damian thought that this was indeed dangerous. The dark mage threatened that now he would regret crossing Yulan's path. Dark matter began to envelop the boy's body, completely engulfing him. The mage shouted that now his body would rot alive. It had already completely enveloped the boy and did not allow him to escape, squeezing his body. The mage called the boy a proud brat and said that he had brought himself to his grave. Recalling the words of the Dark Serpent's leader that the greater the damage, the greater the reward, the mage thought that, in his opinion, the condition had been fulfilled. The dark magician said that now that no one could stop him, it was time to find the woman he had seen yesterday. Damian's voice was heard through the fabric. The boy said that the curse of decay was so stupid. The mage exclaimed in surprise why it had not worked. He asked Damian how much he knew about dark magic. Damian replied mysteriously that who knows. Damian thought that the magician was very surprised, as was he himself. Could it be that the power of the Lord remained in him? Archlick Dorgo shouted that the power of the Lord was as incredible as the power of God. He said that he had endowed his fatal knight with an unbreakable body and the strongest magic in the world. Dorgo noted that he was still not satisfied. He must become a blade that knows no equal and the very embodiment of evil over which he reigns supreme. Archlick said that he would grant him this power so that he would become his ultimate weapon. A powerful pillar of dark energy conjured by Dorgo entered the body of the fatal knight. Looking at the work of his hands, Dorgo exclaimed that this was the full power of the Lord. Archlich could not enjoy his deed and shouted that it was such an unbridled power. This unbridled power that Archlich praised so highly permeated every cell of his body. When it was all over and that power had passed into the body of the fatal knight, Archlich exclaimed that he had finally received the power of God. Without a doubt, it was the power of greed, the same power that filled him in the body of the fatal knight. Damian thought he had lost it when he returned to the past, but now it was back with him. While the boy was lost in thought, he did not notice that the dark mage had attacked him again. The dark mage shouted that he had explained to him how the boy had survived his spell. The boy replied that everyone should have an ace up their sleeve and asked if that wasn't so. Damian remembered that this guy seemed to have said that he was Yulin's man, if he had heard correctly. He remembered that there were rumors that this was an organization that specialized in destroying people using dark magic. So it was no surprise that the dark mage was so powerful. The mage muttered, "What about the ace up your sleeve?" He thought that something was wrong here and that he needed to get rid of him as soon as possible before things got worse. The dark mage said that he had been saving this thing for a confrontation with the church, but it seemed that he would have to use it now. The green energy came from the bracelet at first, but very quickly enveloped the entire mage. Damian realized that the bracelet contained an incredibly high concentration of dark mana. He thought that it was probably not just an ordinary trinket, but a real artifact that accumulated and concealed mana. The energy formed a monster. The mage exclaimed that it didn't matter how it managed to destroy his spell, but he definitely couldn't cope with this power. The dark mage shouted for him to perish in the hellish flames and directed the monster at the boy. The monster rolled toward the boy like a huge wave and seemed to swallow him whole. The dark magical energy began to dissipate, and the boy was no longer there. The mage smiled, thinking that it was all over. The hellish flames, which did not go out even after death, completely engulfed him. But suddenly the boy reappeared and said that it seemed the magician didn't understand a damn thing, so he would explain again. The dark mage was simply stunned by the boy's appearance. He thought, how is this possible? Damian emphasized that the power of greed does not destroy magic. It completely absorbs all dark mana. Then the dark magician shouted that how could someone like him have such terrible power? The boy replied that it was none of his business. He just thought that his equipment was better than his. Gritting his teeth, the boy thought how annoying it was that he had to use the power given to him by the person he hated most in life. But in order to destroy such a powerful opponent, he had no choice but to use the techniques of the fatal knight. Seeing the sword, the mage thought, is that really the blade of the aura? As far as he knew, only those who had reached the level of a swordmaster could master such sword techniques. But how did he manage to do it? The mage shouted for him to wait. However, Damian did not listen to the dark mage. The young man used the soul-cutting blade technique against him. His sword cut through the mage's body, cutting not only his flesh but also his black soul. Putting the sword to the mage's head, Damien said that if he answered the question, he would die without suffering. The boy loomed over the dark mage like a rock and asked where the dark serpent's hiding place was. The Haxon family's carriage had almost reached the trading town of Landwork. Victor asked the young master what had happened. Why did he need to go to Landwork again? Damien called Victor his faithful servant and said that if he wanted to accompany him, he should do so silently. Victor said that he looked peaceful, which could not be said about his book. Then he asked what was written in it. Damien closed the book and replied that it was a grimoire of dark magic. He said he had bought it recently. However, Damien added mentally that he had obtained the grimoire when he had finished off a dark magician. The servant said that he was joking. Maybe he was an idiot who couldn't read, but one thing he knew for sure. Grimoires of dark magic were so dangerous and very difficult to obtain. Suddenly, Victor smelled something unpleasant in the carriage and asked what it could be. When they arrived, Damien got out of the carriage, taking a small bag with him. Handing the bag to Victor, Damien asked him to do something for him. Thinking that the unpleasant smell was coming from the bag, Victor asked what it was. Damien then told Victor that there was a human head in the bag. Taking the bag, Victor looked at the young gentleman suspiciously. Victor addressed the young gentleman and said that whatever his silly jokes were, but immediately fell silent when he looked into the bag. Seeing that there was indeed a human head in the bag, Victor threw it away with a scream. Damien managed to catch it. The servant screamed and Damien signaled him to be quiet and calm down. The boy reminded him that people were watching them. Then Victor whispered and asked whose it was. Damien replied that he would tell him later, but now he had something for him to do. Taking a notebook out of the bag, Damien said that he had to take these things to the specified place. He told the already frightened Victor that this was the only way they could avoid trouble. Following the instructions of the powerful magician, Damien quickly found the lair of the Dark Serpent Gang. Approaching the guards, Damien said that it was impressive. The gangsters had built their headquarters right in the center of the city. How convenient. The guards asked who he was. The young man replied directly to the bandits that his name was Damien Haxon from the Viscountcy of Haxon. One of the bandits said that Haxon sounded like a pork dish. Then he asked why he had given his full name and all that. Then another gangster said that he remembered the boss talking about this guy. Damien said that now they knew who he was. Then he said he had business with their boss and ordered them to step aside. The gangster said that if that was the case, he could pass. Damien was surprised and asked if they had listened to the voice of reason. But at the same time, the other gangster fired a signal flare into the sky with his musket. His partner smiled smugly and asked if he really thought they would let him pass. At his signal, gang members began to appear from all corners. The bandit said that he had opened a welcome gift from the boss for him. At these words, Damien smiled and said that they would soon regret what they had done. Landwork Governor Sebastian Baker was drinking and having fun with the girls. After drinking another glass, he said that thanks to Cedric, his day was going wonderfully. Slamming down his empty mug, Landwork Knight Robert shouted for another mug to be brought over. Cedric said it was an honor for him to bring pleasure to the two of them. The governor laughed and asked if it was true. He replied that it was and added that he would be happy if they came whenever they wanted. Then the governor said that, in his opinion, the Black Snake could take over the trading places belonging to other syndicates. Surprised, Cedric asked if he was serious. Sebastian Baker raised another glass and said that the red light district could come under his complete control. The head of the Black Snake said he was pleased and asked if the others would not oppose it. Putting down his glass, the governor said that he could easily crush their opinion with his power. Robert joined the conversation and said it was a shame there was nothing he could do to help him. Cedric replied that he was protecting their city, and that was enough. The leader of the Dark Serpent Gang said that it was not easy to keep such a large settlement safe. He added that he knew Sir Robert was modest, but there was no need to belittle himself. Pleased with such flattering words addressed to him, the knight blushed and asked if it was true. The governor told him to let them know if he needed anything, and they would try to help as best they could. Cedric nodded and thanked them both. A sly smile appeared on his face. He thought that he would not have to bow his head to these scoundrels for much longer. Soon, the Black Serpent would take over the entire city, and then these freaks would bow down to him. The door to the hall burst open and one of his subordinates appeared. He called out to his boss. The boss shouted that he had guests and asked what he wanted. The subordinate apologized and said he had come with a report. The leader of the Dark Snake Gang left the room to hear what the subordinate had to report. Then the man whispered in his ear that the very guy he had been talking about had come to see him. Surprised, the leader of the Dark Snake Gang shouted loudly, "Is it really Damien Haxon?" So loud that everyone in the hall heard him. Cedric wondered what the Dark Mage was doing now. It was good that he had warned his subordinates earlier. He said he understood and that the man could leave. The man apologized and asked if he could just leave. Cedric asked what the problem was. Then Cedric realized that the guy had come voluntarily, on his own 2 feet, to his certain death. Seeing that he would have to deal with several bandits, Damien took out several bottles of potion and drank them. An incredible power awakened in his body and the guy went to fight the gangsters. While Cedric was telling his subordinate that even if things didn't go as they expected, Damien was cutting down the gangsters in the yard. Cedric informed his subordinate that he had a debtor who would take care of everything if the plan failed. However, in a few minutes, the optimism faded from the gang leader's eyes. Instead, fear appeared there. Standing on the balcony, Cedric thought that he had come out here because of a bad feeling. His subordinate clutched his head when he saw the scene in front of the entrance. The surviving gang members were rolling on the ground, moaning from their injuries. But the young man stood unharmed beside them. It seemed that none of his gang had survived. Cedric wondered how this could have happened. Cedric couldn't believe that some young punk could take them all down by himself. Frightened, Cedric asked his subordinate, who indeed introduced himself as Damien Haxon. He replied to his boss that this was what the boy had said. The gang leader thought that there were rumors about that worthless Viscount's son, and he didn't know that the boy was so strong. Cedric swallowed the lump in his throat and wondered if the dark magician he had hired was really dead. Deciding that this would not work and that he needed help, Cedric left the balcony. 3 people appeared on the roof of the building. Damien noticed an object that looked like it had been created with magic. One of them called Damien a monster and added that he would see how he would deflect it. Flames began to fly from the ball. Damien prepared for the men's attack. He was not afraid of the flames from that magical toy. The man yelled at Damien that he was an idiot and asked if the boy was going to stop their flames with his sword, but the boy had no intention of backing down. He began to move very quickly with his sword, creating a whirlwind that swirled the flames. Then Damien used the secret technique of shadow revelation, countless thunderclaps. To their great surprise, the flames with which they attacked the boy grew and returned to them. Increased in quantity and power, the fire struck the place on the roof where the men were standing. Looking at the charred bodies on the roof, Damien said he thought that was it. The boy thought that all that was left was to confirm who the so-called boss of the Dark Serpent really was. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that he was being attacked. Damien barely managed to jump back and avoid the blow. The attacker struck the ground with such force that stones flew everywhere. Looking at the attacker, Damien mentally noted that his aura was so dense that it gave him goosebumps. The knight said that he was curious to know what kind of bastard was making all the noise here. Straightening up, the knight added that it was just a cocky kid. Damien thought that, judging by everything, this was the level of an official knight. Damien found it strange that knights and even soldiers responsible for maintaining order in the area had arrived. The man shouted that how dare he cause a disturbance in the very center of the city. He then announced that he was Sebastian Baker, the governor of the city, and that he would see to it that the boy was punished for this. The young man thought that the bandit had such a high-ranking guest. Damien asked what he would be punished for. The governor shouted that he was an unheard-of insolent person, and asked if he even realized the seriousness of what he had done. Sebastian said that he had not only attempted to take the life of an honest businessman, but had also attacked his convoy, killing dozens of innocent workers. One of the passers-by shouted that this was nonsense, and asked since when gangsters had become businessmen. After that, the governor shouted that this was unforgivable. Cedric wondered what would happen now. No matter how tough that guy was, he couldn't lay a hand on someone under the governor's protection. Damien asked who the head of the Dark Serpent was, so they met. Cedric mentally called the guy a cheeky brat. He thought that, as he had suspected, the Dark Snake had connections in the city administration. But here it was not connections, but devotion, bordering on worship. Damien told the governor that he was ridiculous for calling Trash a businessman, and that he seemed to have a poor understanding of people. The governor was outraged and ordered him to shut up. Then he said that if the boy begged for mercy, he would graciously reduce his punishment. The young man asked why he should beg for mercy when he was not guilty of anything. The governor shouted that the young man was an arrogant bastard. Then Sebastian said that this would not do. He had tried to be lenient because the man was still young, but now he had no choice and his hands were clean. Then he turned to Sir Robert. Robert understood what the governor wanted and immediately reached for his axe. Approaching Damien, he said that his name was Robert and that he was the defender of this city. Then he ordered him to drop his weapon and surrender. Smiling, Damien asked if the knight defender himself had come to his aid. The knight noticed that the young man was strange. His words were one thing, but there was not a trace of fear in his eyes. When Robert asked if it was courage or stupidity, Damien replied that it was confidence, saying that the boy was stupid after all. Robert attacked him again. Damien managed to dodge. He thought that of course he said that, but at his current level, it would not be easy to fight this knight. The boy decided that he just needed to hold out until the right moment. Realizing that he would not have time to dodge, Damien at least managed to cover himself and soften the blow a little. To increase the distance between them a little, the boy did a few somersaults and retreated. Looking at his hand, Damien thought that he had tried to block the blow as best he could, but the damage was still significant. Damien glanced back to see if she had arrived yet. Noticing this, Robert asked where he was looking. In the moment that the boy was distracted, Robert's axe blade almost touched Damien's face. He thought that Robert was very fast. At that moment, someone flew between them and blocked Robert's blow, saving Damien. The woman hit Robert's axe so hard that he couldn't hold it and it flew far back. The governor and Cedric were stunned when they saw that someone stronger than Robert had appeared. Alarmed by the unexpected appearance, Robert asked if she had any allies, and ordered her to identify herself. Then the woman took off her hood. She was surrounded by a dense, bright aura. One of the soldiers couldn't help himself and exclaimed that this was impossible. Robert asked in surprise if she was a paladin. Hearing Victor Damien call out to him, Robert turned around and noticed that he was in no hurry. Victor happily informed the young lord that he had already arrived. 2 other knights arrived with Victor. Cedric gritted his teeth. He thought that if a paladin had appeared here, then the church had intervened. The leader of the Dark Serpent gang thought that perhaps they had found out that he had made a deal with the Black Magicians. The servant asked the young master if he was all right. He replied that of course he was not and asked where he had been. Damien thought that this must be a paladin from the church. Then he told Victor that at least he had done what he had been asked to do. Trying to smile, Victor muttered that of course Victor carried out his orders better than anyone else. A few hours earlier, Victor had arrived at the place Damien had ordered him to go. They were praying when he entered. One of the nuns saw him first and looked at Victor with surprise in her eyes. Out of breath from the journey, Victor asked if this was a holy church and if he had come to the right place. She approached the young man and confirmed that he was in a holy church, then asked what the matter was. The servant replied that the young master had asked him to deliver it to the church as soon as possible. Victor said that the young gentleman had said something about evidence of a deal with black magicians. Her expression immediately changed, and she asked if he could give her the notes. He immediately handed her the notebook. Taking the notebook, she thought that although the energy was barely noticeable, it was definitely dark magic. There was also this symbol on the notebook. With one swift movement, she snatched the bag from the young man's hands and began to unroll it. Victor almost fainted from fear when he saw the terrifying human head she took out of the bag. Lifting the head to her eye level, the woman thought that she had finally found him. This is one of the leaders of Yulanagito. Tearing off her nun's habit, she asked where the person who sent him was. She asked if he was Damien Haxon. He confirmed it. Then she said that she had received his evidence and that from now on the church would be dealing with the matter. Damien said that of course they would not interfere with the Holy Church and that they could do whatever they deemed necessary. Bowing her head to him, she thanked him again. Damien thought that a paladin from the church was just what he needed. Everything was going according to plan. In the Holy Church, paladins devote their lives to serving God and spend a lot of time in prayer. They are also infinitely merciful and generous towards the common people. However, when it comes to heretics of dark magic and demons, they will burn their souls to the ground without hesitation. They are a bunch of fanatics. They are the guardians and defenders of the Holy Church, and they are called paladins. Damien Haxon thought how good it was that the paladins were now on his side. Turning to the knights and other citizens, she told them to listen. She reported that the church had learned that the man who had made a deal with the criminal and black magician was now in land work. The crowd immediately began to whisper. Someone asked who could have been in contact with such vile degenerates. She said that while they were investigating the matter, the church would protect every innocent resident of the city. The governor shouted, "What are you talking about?" He yelled that landwork had been granted sovereignty by the king himself. Would the church rule the city when he, the mayor, stood before them? Then she turned to Governor Sebastian and said that the destruction of heretics was God's will. The authority of the church was above anyone else here, even the king. Sebastian shouted that he would personally file a complaint against them. She interrupted him and said that he and his knight were the main suspects in everything else. The governor was alarmed and exclaimed that she was talking nonsense. Why would they work with a black magician? Pointing to Cedric, she said that this man was hiding and supporting the dark magician. Her eyes narrowed and she emphasized that the fact that he was defending that man was already suspicious. Then the governor asked Cedric if this was true. He denied it and indignantly asked why he would get involved with them. Folding her arms across her chest, she sighed and told him not to bother because they had evidence. Showing him her notebook, she said that everything was written down there. What and when Cedric Walker had purchased for the Dark Mage. Every ingredient. This could be confirmed or refuted by checking the accounting books in the shops. Realizing that she was telling the truth, Cedric wondered why the damned Dark Magician had recorded all this. Cedric exclaimed that this was some kind of misunderstanding. He emphasized that he swore he had nothing to do with the Black Mage. She replied that the investigation would show, but for now, they would go with them. She ordered them to be taken away, and the other paladins began to carry out the order. The governor shouted that they should not dare to touch him. Noticing the satisfied smile on the young man's face, the governor thought that this had been the monster's plan all along. He thought he would not surrender to them so easily because who knows what these fanatics would do to him. Cedric called out to Sir Robert and asked if he had decided to surrender. Then he suggested that he say something, anything. After all, these freaks would stop at nothing and might even frame him. The leader of the Dark Serpent Gang addressed Sir Robert several more times, but he remained silent. The knight silently obeyed the paladin's orders, but after moving a few meters away, Robert said that surrendering right now would be tantamount to death. With these words, he pushed the paladins, who were no longer expecting resistance from him, and rushed forward. She appeared right in front of Robert, and he grabbed his axe and shouted that he would kill them all and escape. A smile appeared on the face of the leader of the Dark Serpent Gang. He had high hopes that Robert would start a fight. Watching Robert's actions, Damien Haxon thought that he was making a big mistake. Robert decided to carry out his threat and tried to attack. However, his attempt was unsuccessful. Dodging Robert's blow, she said it was so stupid and swung to hit the knight. Her blow was so powerful that she pierced his body through and through with one strike. And to top it all off, she did it with her fist. Cedric's smug grin immediately disappeared. It was obvious that he was seriously frightened, but a slight smile spread across Damien's face. After all, the boy knew what paladins were capable of. Her fist went right through Robert's body and came out the back. Pulling her hand back sharply, she said that those who did not obey God's will would all, without exception, be punished with his help. Fearing for his life, Cedric immediately fell to his knees to show complete submission. The governor shouted for him to be released immediately and called everyone unbearable fools. Victor asked if this was the same boss of the Dark Snake Gang. Damien replied that it was. Then Victor said that there were so many rumors, but he turned out to be a real nobody. Cedric thought he couldn't even believe that the bastard had just thrown him away and discarded his flippers. Damien said that thanks to him, everything ended well. Glancing at her, he thought that, although he had guessed it, she was stronger than he had thought. Assessing her aura, Damien thought that this woman, judging by her sacred power, was a disciple of the Azure Flame. The Azure Flame Brigandan is the strongest in the church, one of the 5 great sages. This paladin is known for destroying countless heretics and black magicians. She called out to Damien Haxon and immediately headed towards him. She said that she couldn't even express how grateful she was for his help in the case with Yulin's group member. The guy replied that anyone in his place would have done the same. Then she said that for this reason they recognized his contribution and would no longer dare to detain him. Shrugging his shoulders, Damien Haxon said he didn't quite understand what she meant. She asked him directly if he had called on the church for support in his attack on the Dark Serpent. Damien thought to himself that she was smart. She had so easily seen through his true intentions. The young man bowed and apologized if he had offended her. Damien explained that the Dark Mage had not only defiled their domain, but had also tried to harm his family. After listening to him carefully, she said that under the circumstances, she could not consider him guilty. Damien thought that she was more understanding than people said. She then announced that the reward for Ajito's head would be paid out in the near future. Damien was surprised to hear that he had not been told about the reward. Hearing that the reward was as much as 1,000 gold coins, Victor almost shouted with joy. Damien thought that this money could buy a small castle, but he wanted to ask the church for something else. Damien asked if he could request a different reward instead of money. Victor could barely contain himself, because the gentleman had spent so much money and now he was turning down a fortune. She replied that it was possible and asked what he would like. Damien replied that he would like one of the mana techniques that belonged to the church. The paladin said she didn't understand why he needed a mana technique if he was strong enough to destroy the Dark Serpent on his own. The boy thought that after that battle with the Orc Mage, he finally understood that he had just been lucky to win with the help of the Lord. But in order to defeat stronger enemies in the future, he would need to reach incredible heights. He would definitely need the mana technique used by knights. This was much more advanced knowledge than anything he had studied before. Damien said that he had only learned the basics and would like to master something more complex. She was surprised and asked if he had reached this level with only basic techniques. She mentally noted that the aura in his body was quite strong, and if he was telling the truth, then he had outstanding talent. Moreover, the young man was very determined to eliminate the heretic without hesitation. After some thought, she said that if that was the case, she had a better idea. Then she asked what he would say if she offered him another reward. The guy asked what she wanted to offer. Smiling, she asked in return if he would like to become a paladin. Damien refused without even thinking. She seemed upset by his refusal. Noticing her disappointment, Victor whispered to Damien that she had killed the knight with a single blow. Her gaze was no longer so kind, and she asked why he had refused. After all, becoming a paladin was the greatest honor bestowed by God, allowing one to punish evil in his name. Frightened, Victor began to hide behind his master's back. She asked if he knew how difficult it was to join their ranks. Damien thought that of course he apologized, but he never believed in God. But an even more important argument was that he did not want to live like a dog on a leash in the church. But he couldn't say that, so now he would come up with something. Putting his hand on his heart, Damien said that he was not yet worthy of God's love. He said that now he wanted to travel the world and follow his light and teachings as a humble parishioner. Victor thought that such an obvious lie would not work again. Victor was surprised when her expression changed from dissatisfied to incredibly sweet, and she exclaimed that these were such golden words. Then she called him pure and righteous. She said that, as he had requested, they would give him knowledge of their magic techniques instead of money. But if he changed his mind, he could come to the church at any time and she would personally welcome him. When she asked for permission for one more, the guy thought it would never happen, but replied that it was fine. The paladin said that she suddenly realized that she had not yet introduced herself. She said that her name was Agnes and that she was the first student of the Azure Flame. Thinking that this was amazing since he had no idea that she was the first, Damien said that it was a great honor for him to meet her. The guy casually asked if he could finish his business here. She replied that it was up to him and asked what business he was talking about. Damien stopped in front of the leader of the Dark Snake Gang and loomed over him. The man looked at Damien and called him a devil's bastard. Cedric shouted that if he was going down with him, but Damien quickly shut him up with a good punch. The Dark Snake boss doubled over and groaned in pain. Damien said he was so fat that it felt like he was punching a pillow. He called the boy a piece of shit again. For these words, he received another strong blow, this time to the jaw. The boy kicked Cedric several more times, and he whimpered pitifully from the blows. Damien Haxon breathed a sigh of relief and said that now he felt much better. Victor approached him and asked if this was definitely the end. Damien said yes to his servant, but then quickly added that he thought so. The Marquis of the Kingdom of Apfel, Holland, Lionbloom, began calling his son Erwin at the door. But he found him in the bedroom. The boy was hiding under the blanket and would not get out of bed. Pulling back the blanket and grabbing his son by the shoulders, Holland Lionbloom asked what the hell he had done. Erwin shouted that the bastard had tried to kill him. The young Marquis Lionbloom said that the man had a knife, but then corrected himself and said it was a fork. Holland Lionbloom thought that his cheerful child was now trembling with fear. He ordered the servants to tell him what had happened, and who had dared to do such a thing to his son. Then the guard reported that it was a boy named Damien from the Haxon family. The Marquise, in a fit of rage, threw a vase and shouted how that scoundrel Haxon dared to raise his hand against his son. Then he emphasized that he was sure that the boy had used some trick. Holland Lionbloom ordered them to immediately send people to the Haxon estate and bring him here. Here he would die like a dog. Upon arriving at the Haxon estate, she greeted Viscount Haxon and informed him that she was a paladin of the church. Paul Haxon also greeted the guests. Marilda Haxon noted that they were happy to see them in their home. Glancing sideways at his son, the Viscount thought that the insolent boy had not only caused trouble, but also brought fanatics into their home. Viscount Haxon said that Damien had told him that they would be staying in their house for a while. Agnes confirmed this and said that it was related to the investigation of the heretics case. The Viscount said that, as they could see, the house was small. Agnes handed him a bag of coins and, thanking him for his hospitality, asked him to accept this modest gift as a token of their gratitude. The Viscount immediately told them to make themselves comfortable and feel at home. Then she turned to Damien and thanked him for allowing the investigative team to do their work. Looking at his parents, who were satisfied with the monetary compensation, Damien replied that there was no need to thank him. Damien thought that when she asked him for a favor, he didn't think they would come to his house. Agnes turned to Damien and emphasized that the investigation was certainly important, but she would like to ask about something else. When Damien asked what she wanted to ask, the paladin replied that she was talking about reading the sermon. Marilda quietly said that it was nothing. It was interesting what she wanted to know. The Haxons looked at their son and Agnes. After assessing the girl's appearance, Viscount Haxon showed his son that she was super. Damien thought that they were thinking about something completely different. Taking out the books, Agnes said that they were about mastering mana techniques. They had been selected especially for him. The boy thanked her and asked why there were 2 books. She replied that one book taught sword techniques. It would be wrong to give him a guide to mana techniques without the corresponding sword techniques. The books were called Destructive Sword Technique and Destructive Energy Technique. He thought he didn't really need the latter, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. After all, he had never seen them in his past life. She added that it wasn't easy to get these 2. Damien said he understood and thanked her again. Agnes said that by saying it wasn't easy, she meant it was very difficult, especially since most of the church was against it. He said how much she must have suffered. Then Agnes told him that she had to use her authority as a teacher, and when she told him about him, he said that Damien was one of the chosen ones that the church needed. Grabbing his hand, Agnes said she was asking him again if he could consider becoming a paladin. Damien raised his hand and said he was sorry. She replied that she understood. Smiling, Agnes said that continuing would be disrespectful on her part, but if he changed his mind, he could always come to her. Watching her leave, Damien thought that, as he had guessed, she was indeed a fanatic, impossibly obsessed. The paladins arrived at the cave where the Dark Mage's lair was located to begin their investigation. Looking over the items, one of them chuckled thoughtfully, then the other asked what was going on. Covering his nose, he asked if it didn't seem suspicious. Then his colleague asked what exactly. The man told him to think about who Ajito was, a high-ranking member of Yulon who had escaped from the church many times. He added that he belonged to the School of Curses and was therefore weak in close combat. But even so, why did such a powerful dark mage die at the hands of an aristocrat from the countryside? He replied that, to be honest, he also had his doubts, but Lady Agnes said nothing about it. Then the man asked if it would be better to raise the issue. He suggested finishing the investigation first and then asking. He suggested focusing on the case when he heard someone say that Damien Haxon could be trusted. They were surprised by her appearance. Agnes said she understood the reason for their doubts, but the young man had not lied. The man replied that he still did not understand how he had managed to kill Ajito. Agnes replied that they already knew how. The paladins remembered how Damien had said that he had simply dodged and quickly cut off his head. He asked if she meant that he had really just dodged and finished him off. Agnes replied that on the day they brought them Ajito's head, she also doubted his abilities. So she stood back and watched instead of intervening. He single-handedly stood up to several dozen people without getting a scratch. The guy completely crushed them, which was the most shocking thing of all. She added that the boy was also able to deflect a fireball, i.e. a magic spell, with his sword. The men were stunned by her story. One exclaimed that it was impossible. Agnes confirmed this and said that she had heard that those who had reached the level of Swordmaster could block any attack, even a magical one. Then one asked if Damien Haxon could be a Swordmaster, to which another replied that he was hardly a Swordmaster, but certainly an outstanding warrior. The paladin said that the main purpose of their visit was to pursue Yulon, but in reality she wanted to take Damien Haxon with her, to meet her teacher. He would be very useful to the church. Agnes emphasized that they should put their doubts aside and focus on the investigation. They replied that they would do so. As ordered by Marquis Holland Lionbloom, the knights set off for the Haxon estate. Ulpis, a knight apprentice from the Lionbloom house, stretched lazily and said that they had already arrived. Another knight apprentice from the Lionbloom house, Lavender, covered his nose and asked Ulpis what the stench was. Ulpis replied that it was the smell of cow dung and jokingly called his partner a princess. Lavender asked if he had any cologne because the last thing they needed was to stink of manure. Another knight apprentice from the Lionbloom house, Garrick, was riding ahead. He glared at his colleagues and ordered them to shut up. Stopping near the house, Garrick asked if this was the Haxon estate. Ulpis confirmed it. Then Garrick asked him to remind him of the mission the Marcus had entrusted to them. Surprised by the question, Ulpis said that they were to arrest Damien Haxon. Grumbling, Herrick said that catching such trash would be easy, but that was not enough to avenge the humiliation felt by young Lord Irvin and the Marquis. The knight noticed an old man who was barely moving, leaning on a cane in the direction of the estate. When the old man passed by the knights, Garrick called out to him. The old man asked who was there and slowly turned around to look at the voice. The old man barely turned toward the knights. Garrick reached for his sword and asked if he lived on the Haxon estate. The old man replied that he did and asked what the matter was. With one swing of his sword, Sir Garrick of Lionbloom cut off the frail old man's head. He shouted that the peasant dared not bow when he saw the Lionbloom coat of arms, and declared that such an offense was punishable by death. The knights remained silent, although they understood that the frail old man was simply blind. Garrick smiled and told Ulpis and Lavender that he had a great idea. He exclaimed that when they arrived at the Haxon estate, they would drag out that freak Damien Haxon. Looking back, Victor saw horsemen rushing towards him. One of them said that they would kill everyone they found in the estate. They came out of the Dark Mage's hiding place, and the old cave was immediately filled with rubble. Turning to the commander, they reported that due to the cave collapse, they had collected less evidence than they had hoped. Agnes replied that it was no big deal because they had done a great job anyway. Their attention was drawn to Damien, who was meditating and training nearby. The men asked Agnes what he was doing. Impressed by what she saw, Agnes replied that she didn't know, but it looked amazing. She wondered what on earth he was doing. The destructive energy technique she had given Damien, when fully mastered, allowed him to absorb the surrounding mana. But she had never heard of anyone being able to learn it in a few hours. It was unmatched. Finishing his meditation, the young man opened his eyes. The paladin stood before him, clearly enchanted by his abilities. Damien asked if they had already completed their investigation. Agnes replied that they had. Agnes turned to Damien and remarked that he seemed to have made a lot of progress. The young man replied that it wasn't that much. He thought she wasn't exaggerating when she said that the technique was difficult to learn. In his past life, he had become a master swordsman, so learning sword techniques made no sense to him. But the technique of mastering mana proved to be extremely useful. It was created to compensate for its high consumption of destructive sword techniques. Therefore, with its help, mana accumulates faster than in other techniques. It even allows you to absorb the surrounding mana for a while. Damien announced that it was time for dinner and asked if they would all return together, as dinner was being prepared for everyone. However, at that moment, Damien was struck by a familiar feeling. The boy felt a thirst for blood. Looking in the direction of the Haxon estate, Damien said that the scum had returned. The boy said that he had urgent business that required his attention, so he would go first. Then he turned to Mrs. Agnes and asked them to go at their own pace. Without further explanation, the boy rushed toward his home. Agnes stared spellbound at Damien's retreating figure. One of the paladins exclaimed that the boy had incredible speed. She thought that he was moving so fast with such a small amount of mana. He must be controlling it with absolute precision. She wondered if he had any limits. The first person they met at the gates of the Haxon estate was Victor. Ulpis immediately began to beat the boy. Calling Victor a dirty scumbag, Ulpis shouted that how dare he challenge him. Hitting the boy again, he shouted that he should do as he was told and immediately bring Damien Haxon to them. Clumsily defending himself from the blows, Victor shouted that he would not do so because they wanted to harm him. One of the maids informed Viscount Haxon about what was happening in the courtyard, and he immediately went to investigate. Paul Haxon shouted for them to stop immediately. Ulpis said that he must be Viscount Haxon. Viscount Haxon immediately rushed to Victor and asked if he was all right, but the boy did not respond. Then Viscount Haxon asked what was going on. How could a knight attack a peaceful citizen? Taking a step forward, Garrick said that compared to what they had done to the Lionbloom's house, this was nothing. He turned to Viscount Paul Haxon and declared that the Marquis of Lionbloom was demanding Damien Haxon. Garrick offered to hand the boy over without any fuss, and then his lands would not suffer. Viscount Haxon thought that he had guessed that Lionbloom would want revenge, but this was outright barbarism. And on top of everything else, it was obvious that this was a blatant lie. If he gave them his son, he was sure that he would burn their house to the ground. Angered, Paul Haxon shouted back that he would never hand over his son. Garrick asked if he was sure of his decision, and the Viscount replied that of course he was. Then Garrick said that in that case, they had no choice. He gave the order to destroy everything there until that bastard Damien Haxon came out. Viscount Paul Haxon shouted that they were scoundrels and ordered them to stop immediately. Suddenly, he heard his son's voice asking if they had completely lost their minds and calling the knights worms. Damien was approaching the estate. The young man radiated a warlike aura and looked determined. Garrick thought he hadn't even noticed when he appeared. He asked the boy who he was. Damien passed by the knights like a shadow. Ulpis thought he didn't understand what was going on because for some reason he couldn't move. Sitting down next to his father, Damien asked if he was okay. The Viscount replied that he was fine, which was more than could be said for Victor. The boy looked at Victor's battered body. Then he said that these scumbags were lucky. He told the knights that if it weren't for Victor's strong body, he would have died from the beating, and in that case, he would have killed all 3 of them right there on the spot. Garrick said that it must be Damien and added that they said he had the courage to challenge the Marquis. But it turns out he's just crazy. Or is he just cocky because he managed to defeat a nobleman with some cheap trick? Then he shouted at the knights, asking them what they were waiting for, and ordered them to break the boy's legs and put him on his knees in front of him. They immediately rushed to carry out the order. Grabbing the knight by the arm, Damien thought that everything had gone to hell. He would not hold back. Now was the perfect moment. The boy wanted to use the mana he had gathered with his destructive energy technique. As he struck, Damien thought that now he had the perfect training dummies. Seeing how quickly the boy had defeated Lavendel, Ulpus became visibly excited, and his excitement was not in vain. Damien Haxon kicked Ulpus hard in the jaw. Garrick couldn't believe his eyes and was very surprised when the boy defeated 2 knights in a matter of minutes. Hearing Damien's voice, Victor tried to open his eyes and called out to his young master in a barely audible voice. However, the boy heard his servant and looked back. He asked Victor again how he was. Smiling, Victor stretched out his hand and showed Damien a sign that everything was fine. A slight smile appeared on Damien's face, and he thought that Victor was really something. Dismounting from his horse, Garrick asked if he had fallen for Lord Irvin's cheap tricks. Then, glancing at the defeated knights, he added that he still did not understand where a rogue like him got such great power. Damien Haxon snorted and replied to the knight Garrick that he didn't need to know. Garrick said that he now understood and had no more questions. Pointing to the boy, he said that he was not Damien Haxon. Damien indignantly asked what he was talking about. Was it true that he was not himself? The knight shouted that he should not lie to him. Did he think that he had not guessed that this was a trap set by hunting dogs to prevent the Lionbloom family from prospering? Garrick shouted that he was not the real Damien Haxon, but an imposter hired to defeat Lord Irwin and disgrace the Lionbloom name. Reaching for his sword, Garrick shouted that they were rootless freaks who wanted to harm his master. Damien sighed and said that he was even more stupid than he thought. Enraged, Garrick took a step forward and began to draw his sword. At the same time, he assessed his opponent. The knight thought that the boy seemed strong, but unlucky. He was half a step away. As soon as he got closer, he wouldn't even have time to blink. With the thought that he would now simply cut the boy in half, Garrick attacked Damien. But Damien easily blocked his blow and, smiling slyly, said that, as expected from the Lionblooms, this time they had sent a real knight. Stepping back, Garrick thought that it couldn't be that the boy had parried his attack so easily. The knight decided that the boy was probably just lucky, but let him try to block this blow. Garrick made several more attempts to attack the boy, but he failed to harm him. Blocking all his attempts to strike, Damien said that he was too slow. Saying that now it was his turn to attack, Damien moved towards the knight of the Lionbloom house. The knight didn't even have time to react before Damien's foot swept across his face. Damien put so much force into his kick that it was enough to send the knight rolling across the ground. The young man told Garrick that this blow was directly for his servant Victor. Leaning on his sword, the knight of the Lionbloom house got up and looked at the boy. His eyes flashed with even greater anger, and calling Damien a bastard, he rushed at him again with his sword. To defeat the boy for sure, Garrick used the absolute technique of the mighty and swift lion sword. Damien Haxon exclaimed that it was just a flashy name and prepared to block his attack. Adding that there was nothing else to it but the name, Damien struck the tip of his opponent's sword with his own. Garrick's sword shattered into dozens of small pieces. The knight simply could not believe that only the hilt remained of his sword. He did not have time to recover from the loss of his sword when, in the next moment, Damien's sword cut off his arm. Unable to stay on his feet, the knight of the Lionbloom house fell loudly to the ground. Viscount Haxon was impressed by how skillfully his son had dealt with the 3 knights. Victor rejoiced at the young lord's victory. Pressing on the wound, Garrick groaned that it hurt like hell, but he had to press harder. Damien approached him and threatened him with his sword. Garrick said he didn't know who he was, but that was how it would be. Victory was his, so he asked for mercy. The boy said he was Damien Haxon and called him an idiot again. Damien said that he should have asked for mercy earlier, and asked if he didn't think it was too late to do so now. The boy emphasized that he had harmed his family and disfigured his already ugly servant, and now he was asking for mercy? The knight exclaimed that he was asking for forgiveness for what had happened. Then Damien asked if he still didn't know who he should apologize to. Turning his head, Garrick saw Victor leaning over him with the clear intention of revenge. Victor had the opportunity to take sweet revenge on his tormentors, whom Damien had brought to their knees before him. The servant turned to his young master and said that he was still not satisfied. Then he asked if he could hit them one more time. Damien replied that it was enough because they would not survive if he continued to torture them. He then added that they could, of course, cut off his other arm or even his leg. Victor noted that it didn't sound so bad. Viscount Haxon put his hand on his son's shoulder and said that he had punished them enough. Garrick fell to his knees before the Viscount and told him that he had been wrong. He began to ask for forgiveness for the disrespect he had shown him. Paul Haxon asked in response if he thought that one apology would be enough to atone for his guilt. The Viscount emphasized that if his son had not been so strong, their estates would already be in ruins, and he would have been dragged to the Marquis to have God knows what done to him. The knight began to bow before the Viscount and beg for forgiveness and mercy. Then Viscount Haxon turned and looked at his son. Understanding his father's gaze, Damien hid his sword. The boy thought that he didn't really want to kill them. In that case, relations with the Lionbloom family would be completely severed. On his own, he would have opposed the Marquis family without even thinking twice. But he had to think about his own family. Nevertheless, if he let them go just like that, revenge would not be long in coming. These bastards would definitely return. Damien was thinking about what to do when Agnes's voice called out to him. Appearing at the gate of the Haxon estate, Agnes asked what had happened there. When he saw Agnes, an idea came to Damien's mind. The boy thought that she would help him this time too. After listening to Demi and Haxon's story, Agnes thoughtfully said, "So that's how it is." Agnes said that if that was the problem, she might know how to help them. The boy asked her about her idea, and Agnes reminded him that thanks to the Haxon family, they had successfully eliminated a member of the Yulin family for the first time in a long time. The paladin said that this way the church could declare them an allied house. Damien thought that in this case their family would be able to avoid trouble. She said that if it wasn't too difficult for them, they might accept their request. Overjoyed, Damien grabbed Agnes's hand and replied that of course they would. Damien thought to himself that this was exactly what he had been striving for, to be under the protection of the church. Letting go of her hand, Damien apologized for his behavior. Agnes was a little embarrassed but replied that it was fine. Giving the Knights of the House of Lionbloom an angry look, Damien Haxon asked if they had all heard him. The young man told the knights to go and report this to the Lionblooms. He ordered them to convey that from now on, the House of Haxon was under the protection of the church. He emphasized that if they tried to resort to violence again, they would have to deal with the wrath of the church. He then added that if they understood, they should leave. Thanking him for his mercy, the Knights of the Lionbloom house rushed away from Viscount Haxon's estate. Victor noted that they had taken to their heels and added that they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Damien replied that he was not sure. Viscount Haxon said that now they needed to figure out what to do next, and suggested holding a family meeting. Paul Haxon gathered all the family members and also invited Agnes to discuss the circumstances. When everyone had taken their seats, he proposed to begin the meeting. He announced that the topic of discussion was the well-known conflict with the Lionbloom family. Viscount Haxon asked if anyone had any ideas on how to resolve it. Raising his hand, Abel asked his father if they had not already received the protection of the church. Why did they need to deal with them at all? Louise turned to Abel and noted that they could not rely solely on the protection of the church. Paul Haxon said that Louise was right. The church did not particularly interfere in the affairs of the aristocracy. Moreover, the power of the Lionblooms lay not only in their strong knights. The Viscount said that if they wanted to, they could crush any noble family they didn't like in many ways. He said that at the moment the most likely options were either to buy them off or to seek protection from aristocrats with higher titles. In essence, coming under the protection of a great noble house was the best option. Then Agnes, who had been quietly listening to their discussion, joined the conversation and said that there was another way. Agnes said that Mr. Damien Haxon could become a paladin. The boy thought that he did not expect her to bring this up. All the members of the Haxon family immediately looked at him, waiting for his answer. Damien replied that he did not want to. Agnes said disappointedly that she understood. Paul Haxon snorted and said that since Damien was not interested, the option was not being considered. Suddenly, Abel jumped up and slammed both hands on the table. His father asked him what was wrong. Abel asked his father why he had accepted the refusal so calmly. After all, if he became a paladin, all their problems would disappear. Pointing his finger at his brother, he suggested that his father simply order him to join their ranks. Damien frowned and thought that this little shit was talking as if it didn't concern him. Slamming his hand on the table again, Abel asked his brother what kind of look that was and emphasized that, if you think about it, it all started because of him. And since he was to blame, he had to decide for himself. Viscount Haxon turned to Abel and reminded him that they had guests. Then he ordered him to sit down while he was still asking nicely. When Abel sat down, Paul Haxon said that Abel was right about Damien starting the conflict with the Lionblooms. But he added that it wasn't just his fault. Paul Haxon reminded him that the Marquise's second son, Erwin, had ulterior motives toward Louise. Even if Damien hadn't intervened, do they think this guy would have given up so easily? He said that, truth be told, Damien had protected Louise from the Marquis' son's plans when he himself had been unable to do so. Rising from the table, Viscount Haxon put his hand on his son's shoulder and said that his son had done well today. He had rebuffed the insults against their family and repaid them as they deserved. Looking into his father's tear-filled eyes, Damien thought that he had no idea his father would be so moved. Bowing his head to his father, Damien said that he had simply done what he had to do. The Viscount told his son not to worry. From now on, he would take care of everything himself. He asked for a chance to behave like a decent father for once. He had not yet finished speaking when the butler entered the room and immediately apologized for intruding so boldly. Paul Haxon asked what had happened. The butler reported that a man from the Goldpix family had arrived. The Viscount asked in surprise what business the Duke could have with them. The butler said he didn't even know how to say it, and then began to explain that young Lord Damien had borrowed money against the family's wheat fields. The butler then said that the repayment deadline had already passed. Damien hoped that the butler would not say that he had already sold them. Upon hearing this, Viscount Haxon simply flew into a rage and lunged at Damien. He shouted that he was a damn insolent fool. When Damien appeared in the hallway, he immediately took off his hat and wished him a good day. Damien thought he vaguely remembered this guy. Olad Demishi was the head of the western branch of Money in a second. Appearing at the door, he sweetly sang about how many years they had not seen each other, and he had come for payment because today was the last day of repayment, as they had agreed. The guy remembered how he had suggested mortgaging their land as collateral. He emphasized that it was just a formality and there was nothing to worry about. Olad then asked how a plebeian like him could take land from an aristocrat. Damien thought that his sweet words had encouraged him to take such a risk. He wondered how, as a former devil, he could have given away the documents to the land. Damien asked to be reminded of how much he owed. Olad said that he had borrowed 200 gold coins, but interest had already accrued, so he had to return 300 gold coins. Unable to restrain himself, Damien exclaimed indignantly how much he owed. Olad repeated that everything was correct and asked if he wanted to look at the contract. Damien thought that so much time had passed that he had even forgotten why he had borrowed the money. But one thing was clear, his family did not have that kind of money right now. With such success, they would all end up on the street begging for alms. Olad said that if he didn't pay today, the mortgaged land would become the property of their organization. Damien asked who said that the mortgage was just a formality. He replied that of course he had said that, but what could he do? After all, Duke Goldpix had ordered them to collect the debts, and it didn't matter whether they were nobles or commoners. He added that if he understood his position, he had to pay. Then he asked again if he really couldn't. Damien Haxon said that he had not been able to prepare the payment. A satisfied smile appeared on Olad's face, and he said, "So that's how it is." Sitting down unceremoniously on the sofa, Olad said that then he shouldn't have borrowed in the first place. Olad snapped his fingers and 2 bouncers loomed over Damien. He said that then there was nothing left to do but get paid his way. The manager thought that he knew from the very beginning that the man would not be able to pay off the debt. And to be honest, he loved money, but most of all he loved moments like this. Olad Demishi thought he loved it when arrogant aristocrats groveled before him. He was very curious to see what Mr. Haxon's face would look like when he fell at his feet. Just imagining it gave him goosebumps. At that time, Viscount Haxon was pacing around the room, worried that they would lose everything. Marilda turned to her husband and asked him to sit down and not worry. At the same time, she noticed that he was about to wear a hole in the floor. Then Louise turned to Abel and also asked him to calm down. Paul Haxon asked his wife how he could sit calmly when the fate of the family was at stake. Abel exclaimed that this was indeed the case because how could they calmly relax when they did not know what awaited them? Marilda replied that Damien had said he would take care of it and suggested that they trust their son and wait. Louise added that Damien had never let them down when he took matters into his own hands. Viscount Haxon exclaimed that this was only because Damien was unmatched with a sword. Paul Haxon then remarked that combat skills and negotiation skills were 2 completely different things. At that time, Damien used what he knew best. Grabbing one of the bouncers hanging over him, Damien slammed him hard onto the floor. Olad jumped up in surprise and amazement when he saw that Damien had knocked down the burly bouncer with 1 blow. Lifting the man who was unconscious from the blow, Damien said disappointedly that his father would scold him again. After all, they had just repaired the wall and now the floor was damaged. Then another bouncer shouted that he was a little bastard and swung his sword at Damien. But at that moment, Damien's hand was at the bouncer's throat, his fingers clenched tightly around it. The boy lifted the giant with one hand and remarked that he had dared to swing his sword at a nobleman. Then, with a sly smile, he glanced at Olad and added that in that case, it was simply self-defense. Realizing that he would be next, Olad Demishi squealed in fear and pressed himself against the sofa. Approaching the sofa where Olad was sitting, Damien told him not to even think about running away. Olad bowed his head in submission. Damien said that he couldn't pay him the full amount right now. Olad immediately sang that everything was actually fine and there was nothing to worry about. But the guy stopped him and, putting his hand on his shoulder, asked about paying in another way. Feeling the fingers tighten on his shoulder, Olad immediately nodded and said he agreed. The next day, Abel told his father that his heart was broken. Viscount Haxon asked his son why. He replied that it was because justice had been achieved through violence. Then the Viscount told his younger son to stop talking nonsense and go wish his brother good luck. Looking at his son, Paul Haxon thought that he had reluctantly agreed, but was still worried whether his plan would really work. Lady Agnes appeared in the courtyard and, turning to Damien, said that it was a pity that they were already saying goodbye. The young man walked up to her and said he was very grateful for her help. She replied that she had simply done what was right. At the same time, she announced that their investigation was almost complete, and they planned to return tomorrow. Agnes then folded her hands in prayer and said she was blessing Mr. Damien for a safe journey. He thanked her sincerely. Agnes said that if he changed his mind, but Damien didn't even let her finish and replied that he would not change his mind. Damien said that he had already said goodbye to everyone and asked Victor if they could leave. Victor replied that he had already packed his luggage. Sitting in the carriage, Damien noticed that it was quite spacious. Olad politely told them to make themselves comfortable. Olad Demishi assured the boys that nothing would bother them while they were on the road. Smiling, Damien said that this was an excellent mood, and since that was the case, he suggested having lobster for lunch. Then, glancing at Victor, he told his servant that it was time to go. Victor immediately agreed with his young master. Leaning out of the window, Victor shouted to the coachman that they could set off. The coachman nodded to Victor, and in the next moment, the horses broke into a gallop and the carriage set off. Glancing at Olad, Damien said that they were going to visit Duke Goldpix. When they got out of the carriage, they were amazed by the size of Duke Goldpix's estate. Victor noted that the estate was befitting of the family, considered the richest in the kingdom. Damien told Olad that if things went well here, he would not forget to mention his help. He said that the Duke already knew about their arrival, so they could go in. Olad smiled, but in his mind he called the guy an asshole because he made him work like a yard dog. Therefore, he hoped that nothing would work out for him and that the guy would come to an end. Smiling, Olad said to Damien that he hoped everything would go perfectly. Damien nodded to Olad in response and said he would be back soon, then headed for the house. Victor said he would eagerly await the young master. The boy was led to the office where the Duke was already waiting for him. Adam Goldpix asked if he was the same incompetent son of Viscount Damien Haxon. Damien replied that he was flattered by what he had heard about him. The boy thought to himself that it was obvious that everyone here knew him as such. Then Duke Goldpixie noted that he wanted to see him, and asked what was the reason for such a desire. He explained that he had borrowed money from a creditor who worked for their family. The deadline for repayment was approaching. The Duke realized that the young man was their client. Damien said he was very sorry, but at the moment he had no money, so he wanted to know if he could repay the debt in some other way. The Duke asked what he meant, and Damien said that instead of giving him money, he would defeat the Lionbloom family for them. Hearing this statement, the Duke's knights were stunned and began to look at each other. Adam Goldpix laughed and said that the boy must be in the know. Jael Heimlich, a knight of the Goldpix family, said that it seemed that way. Damien thought that everyone in the Kingdom of Apfel knew about it. Recently, a gold mine had been discovered on the border between the Gold Pixie and Leon Bloom territories. The two families, who had never gotten along, wanted to fight over it, using weak knights to monopolize the mine. But Damien already knew what the outcome would be. The Lionblooms would completely destroy their opponents. Then they will significantly increase their influence with the help of the gold they have obtained. As a result, the Gold Pixie family will lose its reputation. The young man thought that if he helped the Duke, he would be able to deal with the debt and also keep the Lionblooms under control. Adam Goldpix noticed that the boy was quite ambitious. He also asked if it was true that he had defeated the Lionbloom's second son and even destroyed a large criminal organization in Landwork. Laughing, Damien Haxon replied to the Duke's question that not all of this was rumor. The Duke said that this was very intriguing and informed him that he was looking for a knight who was ready to take part in a duel. Damien said that he was the ideal candidate. He asked who else would agree to fight the Lionbloom's eldest son. Intrigued, Adam Goldpix asked if he could defeat him and noted that he was renowned as a genius. The young man confirmed that the eldest son of the Lionblooms was indeed experienced, but that he would be able to defeat him. Unable to restrain himself, the knight shouted that the Duke should not believe the young man. After all, the rumors were surely exaggerated. The Duke noted that this was a valid argument. Ernst Howitz was a knight of average skill. Glancing at Damien, he said that Lady Chelsea would find the perfect candidate. One of the knights added that Ernst was right. Lady Chelsea had left the estate a month ago to find the perfect knight to duel with Michael Lionbloom. She would return soon. She had never let the Duke down, so they were sure that she would bring back an unbeatable knight. After thinking for a moment, Duke Goldpix told his knights that their words made sense. Looking at the satisfied faces of the knights, Damien thought that these freaks were ruining everything for him. Adam Goldpix said that he had heard the opinion of his subordinates. Then he asked what he thought he should do. Damien realized that he wanted to see his reaction. In that case, he had to show them. So he told the knights that they were very much mistaken, and if they wanted to win this duel, they had to trust him with the fight. It didn't matter who Miss Chelsea brought. No one would be better than him. Ernst asked how he could say that when he didn't know who she would bring. The young man said that if they wanted proof, he would try to withstand their strongest attack. If he managed to block their best attack, he would prove that he was worthy of fighting. Ernst thought how that bastard could underestimate him. Ernst turned to the Duke and asked if he would allow him to teach this arrogant man a lesson. The Duke thought it was very interesting and decided to watch. He said he would allow it. They all came to the training hall of the Goldpix Knights to watch the duel. Victor called out to the young lord and remarked that he thought he had come here to convince the Duke. But what was happening now? Damien replied that it had turned out the way it had. Looking at the knight who was preparing for battle, Victor thought that he seemed dangerous. Adam Goldpix told Ernst Howitz that he could begin. The knight replied, "Yes, my lord." Throwing his spear, he shouted at Damien to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. Then he would accept his apology. Damien yawned and told him to finally begin because he was already tired. Ernst said that he was simply begging to be finished off. Releasing his aura, Ernst Howitz asked if he wanted to see his best attack. Assessing his opponent's anger and mood, Damien thought that he had probably irritated him too much. The knight shouted that he would pierce his worthless face and immediately went on the attack. In a matter of seconds, Damien analyzed the knight's upcoming attack and thought that it was exactly what he would expect from an average fighter. Damien thought that if he could calculate where the knight was aiming, it would be no problem to parry his attacks. The boy realized that the knight was aiming right at his heart, and he had only a moment to stop him. He reacted quickly and covered the spot where Ernst was aiming with his spear with his sword. But the tip of the spear split Damien's sword and it began to crumble into small pieces. Satisfied with his attack, Ernst called the boy an idiot for his behavior. There was nothing between the tip of the spear and Damien's body, so Ernst wounded him after all. Victor almost lost his mind when he saw blood spurting from the young man's chest. Everyone held their breath. However, Damien Haxon continued to stand firmly on his feet and did not retreat a single step. Stunned, Ernst thought it was impossible for him to withstand his sudden attack. Smiling, Damien turned to the Duke and asked if he agreed that the place in the duel was now his. Seeing that he was all right, Victor ran up to him in joy and hugged his master tightly. The servant asked if he was all right, as he was so frightened that something had happened to his master. Damien jokingly called the servant an asshole and said that it hurt. Applauding, the Duke said that he had managed to withstand Hovitz's blow, which was incredible. Adam Goldpix thought he had doubted him, but the boy had proven himself to be unbeatable. What a wonderful boy. The Duke ordered his vassals to listen. Damien Haxon had proven his abilities. Therefore, as promised, he would participate in the duel on their behalf. Ernst immediately turned to the Duke and wanted to object, but the Duke ordered him to be quiet. Adam Goldpix announced that he was in a good mood, so let him not dare to spoil it. Looking at the smiling boy, Ernst could not understand how this had happened, because he was sure that he had gotten the better of him. Damien thought that the Duke had outsmarted him. Although Ernst was very talented, he was simply unlucky with his opponent. After all, his level was already above average. But if only low-ranking warriors can fight in a duel, then he has to play that role. There's nothing he can do about it. It's an excellent game that leaves no room for doubt. At that very moment, if he hadn't used his mana to defend himself, everything could have ended badly. The Duke approached the young man and said that he might have internal injuries and offered to help. Adam Goldpixie turned the ring on his finger and it began to glow. A small portal opened and the Duke reached for it. Damien was surprised when he saw the spatial magic. Adam Goldpixie began to take a small but beautifully decorated box out of the portal. Opening the box, the Duke announced that he had a gift for him. It was a magical item called a balance pill. He added that he had paid the alchemy school a considerable amount of money for it. Damien thought it was just a jackpot. This item improves physical properties and is similar to the potion he drank. The Duke said that knights usually take them during training, but they also help with internal injuries. Damien thanked him for such a valuable gift. Putting his hand on Damien's shoulder, Adam Goldpix said that he was now counting on him. Waking up in the morning, Damien left his room to take a walk and take another look at the training hall. The young man touched his chest and noticed that the pills were indeed effective. Almost all of his wounds had healed overnight. Entering the training hall, Damien said that he hadn't noticed it yesterday, but there were quite a lot of good weapons for training here. There would be plenty to do. Near the training ground, he met one of the knights of House Goldpix. The knight asked if he was Damien Haxon. Looking at the short boy, Damien confirmed it and asked the knight who he was. Pebble Bermond was a low-ranking knight, but he proudly and arrogantly gave his name. Looking back at the training ground, Pebble Bermond said that these were his brothers. He said that they were also fighting with the local knights for the right to participate in the duel. To Damien's obvious surprise, Pebble shouted that they had been training in the courtyard yesterday, so they had missed everything. So he was lucky. Pebble Bermond shouted that if they were in Hovitz's place, they would definitely teach him a lesson. The knight creaked that the duel with the Lion Blooms was a very important mission, and that the fate of the entire kingdom was at stake. He then added that he hoped that the man would not disgrace them with his ridiculous abilities. Then Pebble said that if he understood, he should get lost and not interfere with their training. Damien replied that he didn't care. In fact, Damien was interested in the abilities of Duke Goldpix's knights, and he saw what he wanted to see. Pebble Bermond gave the command Hup and executed it himself. This was the starting position of the immovable Akala. His brother shouted the command Hap and used the secret technique Ascension of the Phoenix. The brother told Pebble that today was their 98th battle and this time he would definitely defeat him. The latter laughed and said that his brother could only dream about it. Each of them tried with all their might to hold their position and not give in. The brothers continued to stand in the same position for some time. Then Pebble shouted the command Hap and swung his sword. However, his brother managed to react and dodge the blow. While Pebble was swinging his sword above him, his brother seized the moment and swung his sword to strike, and he succeeded. He struck Pebble right in the forehead with his sword. Pebble himself did not expect to succeed, so he was initially alarmed, but then he exclaimed that it was just as he had expected from Pebble. His brother exclaimed that Pebble had anticipated his attack and blocked it with his own forehead. Bowing to Pebble, his brother said that today he had gained new knowledge. Pebble replied that his brother had also made great progress, and that today they were tied. Swaying, the other brother shouted that now he would fight him because his whole body was begging for it. Pablo replied that he would rest a little first. His brother noted that the duel was in a month. If they continued in the same spirit, they would show good results. Pebble replied that of course they would be able to defeat the Lion Blooms. They would even enhance the reputation of the duchy. Raising their swords, the brothers shouted in unison, "One for all and all for one." Damien watched this grueling training session. Victor approached him and, seeing that the young gentleman was quite gloomy, asked what was wrong and who those guys were. Damien cursed silently and thought that they were doomed. He told Victor that he believed they could not win the duel. The servant apologized for not understanding and asked why he had suddenly decided that. Nodding toward the knights, Damien said he wasn't sure they would emerge victorious against those idiots. Adam Goldpix burst out laughing. He remarked that this was not at all befitting of high-ranking knights and asked Jael if this was not so. The knight replied that he didn't care at all. The Duke told him to stop because he could be honest with him. Jael replied that he had told the truth. And all because of what happened that evening. Damien thanked the Duke for the offer and said that he preferred to train on his own. The Duke said he had just asked, but who would have thought that he would refuse to train with Gail Heimlich? This Damien Haxon is an interesting guy. After calming down a bit, Adam Goldpix asked Jael what he thought of the boy. The knight replied that he was an exceptional young man. He used mana a second before Hovitz's blow reached him, and that's not something everyone can do. Adam Lionbloom asked what he thought the boys' chances were in the duel. Would they be able to defeat the Lionbloom family? The knight replied that it was quite difficult to predict. Jael Heimlich explained that since there would be 3 participants in the duel, victory would depend on who won 2 of the 3 matches, so it didn't matter if Damien did well. The Duke said that was true. Their other knights also had to prove themselves. Then the Duke asked if they were training hard. Jael said that Sir Vincenzo, a knight of medium rank, was in charge of their training, so there was no need to worry. Watching the training, Damien thought that this was a big problem that he had not expected at all. Never mind that they were stupid, but their physical condition was also terrible. Nevertheless, they still managed to show off. With this level of training, they will definitely lose. Damien slapped his forehead in despair and said that there was no choice but to intervene. He yelled at the guys, calling them punks and 3 losers. They immediately turned their attention to Damien. One of the brothers indignantly asked what he had called them. Damien repeated that they were losers and suggested repeating the sparring match. Pebble asked if he wanted to fight them after seeing their abilities. Then he added that he was brave and said he would be the first to fight him. Damien Haxon replied that he had misunderstood. He didn't want to fight only him. Putting heavy bags on his hands and feet, Damien said he wanted all 3 of them to attack him at once. Hearing this, the brothers became angry. Pebble immediately shouted that Damien was an arrogant asshole. The brothers immediately dropped their swords, and Pebble shouted that it was fine. This was, of course, against the code of chivalry, but when dealing with such a madman, beating him up was the best solution. Immediately, all 3 brothers rushed at Damien with their fists to teach the arrogant boy a lesson, in their opinion. Pebble opened his eyes and sat up. Looking around, he saw his brothers lying next to him. On the other side stood Damien Haxon. He asked Pebble if he had recovered and added that they were as pathetic as he had thought. Victor asked the young gentleman why he was looking for trouble again. Damien replied to Victor that he wasn't looking for trouble but had just taught the Duke's knights a little lesson. Pebble thought that he only remembered how the 3 of them had attacked him, but then nothing else. 5 minutes ago when they attacked him, Damien dodged the first brother's attempt to strike him. A second later, he simply leaned back a little to avoid the second brother's attempt to strike him. And when they lost their balance and fell, he simply hit both brothers on the back of the head. As they crashed to the floor, Pebble flew at Damien from above. But Damien only had to raise his fist, and Pebble simply crashed into him. The blow landed on Pebble's jaw, and he lost consciousness and fell to the floor next to his brothers. Looking at Damien, Pebble thought that he had knocked them all out. Who would have thought that he could handle all 3 of them? Watching Damien Haxon lift the weights, Pebble wondered what kind of monster he was. Saying that he wasn't even sweating, Damien called out to the guys and asked who was training them. Pebble Berman reported that they were being trained by a knight of medium rank, Sir Sebastian Vincenzo. Damien was surprised that a knight of such rank was training them, given their poor preparation. He thought about telling them to stop training with him, but didn't want to provoke unnecessary conflict. So he said that when they finished training with Vincenzo, they should find him. From that moment on, he would spar with them every day. Pebble replied that if Sir Vincenzo found out about this, he would beat them up because he might misunderstand. Damien told him not to worry. No matter how many times he hit them, there would not be a single scratch on their bodies. Pebble came to his senses and noticed that even though he had just beaten them, their bodies were completely fine. The knight asked how this was possible. Damien Haxon replied that a long time ago he had learned a special method of beating people. A long time ago, there was a man who traveled across the continent and re-educated criminals. He was nicknamed the Educator. His method of reforming criminals was simple. The Educator beat criminals for an hour, and if that didn't work, he increased the time. According to legend, his record was 512 hours. In the process, the Educator began to feel pity for his bloodied victims and thought about it. He became curious whether he could beat someone without inflicting life-threatening injuries. As a result, he achieved such mastery that he created the technique of the Trace's free strike. Damien thought that he had just used it. It is capable of causing severe pain without leaving visible damage. He asked his brothers if they now understood how weak and useless they were. Then he told them not to worry because they had a month before the duel. During that time, he would turn them into useful and strong fighters. They were stunned and frightened by the boy's statement. Damien informed them that it was time to return to training. The Duke's servant ran into the hall and, turning to Damien, said that he was here. Damien was surprised to see the Duke's personal servant here. The servant said that the Duke was looking for him. Damien then asked what was going on. The servant, somewhat embarrassed, said that Lady Chelsea had returned. Bowing, she told her father that they had not seen each other for a long time and informed him that she had just arrived. The Duke's eldest daughter, Chelsea Goldpix, glanced at the knight Ernst Howitz and smiled lightly. The knight also glanced at Lady Chelsea and thought that she had returned safe and sound. The Duke noted that a whole month had indeed passed and asked if she had managed to find a knight to represent them in the duel. Chelsea Goldpixie replied to her father that she had and glanced at the knight behind her. He immediately stood up and exclaimed that he greeted the Duke. He then announced that his name was Guillermo Blackwing, nicknamed the Wild Beast. One of the knights whispered Guillermo Blackwing's name and asked if that was not the name of a famous mercenary. He said he had heard that he had taken part in the confrontation between the kingdoms of Aclaren and had carried out a terrible massacre among the low-ranking knights. They also say that no low-ranking knight can defeat him. The Duke said he had heard a lot about him. He earned his nickname by raging in battle like a wild beast. The knight replied that he did not think that even in the kingdom of Apfel they knew about him. Lady Chelsea informed her father that Sir Guillermo had sworn allegiance to him and also promised to take part in the duel. He would definitely defeat Michael. One of the knights remarked that he was indeed stronger than Michael. Another added that this was true. While Michael was still striving for perfection, Sir Guillermo had already achieved it. Adam Goldpick said that this was good news, but there were some complications. Lady Chelsea then asked what he meant. The Duke replied that he had not yet introduced them, but that he would represent them in the duel. Sir Damien Haxon. Lady Chelsea asked her father what this meant and pointed out that she had asked him to wait for her return. The Duke replied that she had asked, but he had not said he would wait. She told her father that he could appoint a second representative, but the Duke said he needed to think it over. Unable to restrain herself, she shouted that there was nothing to think about. Lady Chelsea said that this was the first time she had heard of this knight. Damien thought that she must be his daughter. Looking at Damien, she shouted that it was obvious that Sir Guillermo should be chosen, not some nameless knight like him. The boy thought that in their eyes he was like a pathetic insect, but that boy looked familiar. The Duke objected and emphasized that Sir Guillermo was certainly quite famous, but Sir Damien was capable of blocking even the strongest attack from Hovitz. She shouted that he just didn't want to acknowledge her skills, and now he had the perfect excuse to ignore them. Chelsea said that his words always contradicted his actions, both in relation to her and her mother. Frowning, the Duke asked how she dared to speak in such a tone in front of their guests. The girl smiled and immediately apologized, saying that the long journey had exhausted her. Damien began to feel that there was some strong animosity between father and daughter. The Duke said that he would first discuss the matter with the others and therefore stopped arguing. He gestured to his daughter that she was free to leave. Then Guillermo burst out laughing and asked the Duke what the point of this futile conversation was. He suggested resolving the issue in a manly way. Jael Heimlich did not like such bluntness. He noted that it was very rude. Turning to Damien, Guillermo asked if the stronger one should not be the representative. Why not just let them fight and let the winner participate in the upcoming duel? Lady Chelsea asked what he was doing, as she had forbidden him to speak. But the Duke liked this idea and, chuckling contentedly, said that he was right. The Duke turned to Damien and asked what he thought about it. The boy thought that the Duke was testing him again. Obviously, to resolve this situation, he would have to show his skills. Damien replied that he was right. The strongest should fight in a duel, but he did not think it was necessary to arrange a fight. The young man thought to himself that he also wanted to test something, so he asked why they shouldn't settle it here and now. The other laughed and said he apologized in advance if he tore off his arm or leg. Damien jokingly replied that he was already scared. Smiling, Damien said that in that case he would show mercy and just dislocate his shoulder. Guillermo replied that he believed him. Then he immediately tried to grab Damien. However, Guillermo did not realize how he ended up on Damien's back. Damien simply flipped him in the air. Then, throwing him over himself, Damien slammed the big guy to the floor. Everyone was stunned by how Damien had taken down such a big guy in an instant, even without a weapon. Watching Damien shake Lady Chelsea's hands, she wondered what had just happened. High-ranking Knight Jael Heimlich watched the boy's actions closely and thought it was incredible. He noticed that Guillermo Blackwing was the first to try to grab Damien Hawkins' arm. However, Damien used the attacker's strength against him and threw him to the floor with force. Jael Heimlich mentally noted that the boy was not only strong, but also quite intelligent. Sitting down, Guillermo Blackwing squeaked that how dare he humiliate him in front of everyone. Damien thought he wasn't bad. He quickly got to his feet. He replied that he was stronger than he expected, and added that he was really going to dislocate his shoulder. Grabbing his axes, Guillermo yelled that he was a piece of shit, and threatened to tear him to pieces. Realizing that Guillermo was serious, Chelsea Goldpixie shouted his name. However, he didn't even pay attention to her and shouted that he would also crack his skull to hell. This situation angered Jael Heimlich because it went far beyond what was permissible. He shouted for them to stop immediately. Grabbing his sword, the enraged knight asked how they dared to draw their weapons before his grace, and asked if they were now ready to face punishment. Jael Heimlich's powerful aura enveloped the burly Guillermo and squeezed his body as if in a vice. He groaned under the pressure. Damien thought it was incredible. If his aura alone could create such pressure, then he clearly deserved to be called high-ranking. Jael Heimlich said he would turn a blind eye to this only once, but only out of respect for Lady Chelsea. Still holding the hilt of his sword, Jael Heimlich emphasized that he would warn him only once and there would be no second chance. After that, he weakened the pressure of his aura, and Guillermo fell to his knees with a sigh of relief. Then Duke Adam Goldpick stood up and noted that there had been a minor quarrel between the knights. He said that, in his opinion, it would be better to leave Damien Hacken as their representative in the duel. Ernst Howitz turned to the Duke and exclaimed that the duel was not fair. The Duke was surprised by this statement. The knight argued that Guillermo Blackwing was almost at his limit. After all, he had not yet recovered from the long journey. Therefore, Damien Haxon had a great advantage. Damien thought that piece of shit was at it again. Another argument of Hovitz was that Guillermo was a knight who used weapons in his battles, and in a fistfight, it was impossible to properly assess all his abilities. Lady Chelsea sided with Hovitz and said that Ernst was absolutely right. They should compare their skills fairly, not in a childish quarrel, but in a real duel. Her stubbornness annoyed the Duke. Adam Goldpix told Chelsea to stop insisting on the opposite. Then Chelsea Goldpixie was outraged by his remark, and, raising her voice, tried to argue again. Slamming his fist on the table, the Duke shouted for her to stop immediately, and declared that her ignorance was disgracing the good name of Gold Pixie. Lady Chelsea fell silent and took offense at her father's words. Lowering her head, she muttered that she had behaved inappropriately. Knight Ernst Howitz clenched his fists when he saw how upset Lady Chelsea was. Damien Hacken turned to Duke Gold Pixie and asked if he could express his opinion. When the Duke allowed him to speak, the young man said that he was actually ready to accept Lady Chelsea's proposal. Outside, Victor wouldn't shut up. He said he didn't understand why the young gentleman had accepted the challenge. After all, he would have lost nothing by simply keeping his cool. Now he was asking for trouble. Damien replied that he had his reasons for everything, so there was no need to grumble. Noticing a sign, the young man said that this was the smithy the Duke had mentioned. The Duke then said that if Damien insisted, he would not stop him. Instead, since his sword had broken in the duel with Howitz, he would order a new blade to be forged for him in the Duke's smithy. The young man thought that he could defeat a freak like Guillermo, even with a training sword, but it would be a sin to refuse the Duke's mercy. Upon entering, Victor announced that they had come on behalf of Duke Goldpix. He asked to take the sword that the young lord would use. The man replied that he had been informed of their arrival and told them to follow him. Seeing many different weapons, Victor exclaimed with delight that they were unsurpassed. Damien Hacken noticed one of the swords. The employee noted that it was indeed a unique sword. He said that the sword had been made to order for a knight who was in the service of the Duke. Unexpected circumstances forced him to leave urgently before the sword was finished. Therefore, the owner was never able to take it into his hands. Damien asked if the knight had provided them with the metal for forging. The employee was surprised and asked how the young man knew. The boy mentally noted that the shape of the blade resembled the favorite weapon of the legendary master known in the past as the Maestro of the Sword. Taking the sword in his hands, Damien said he would take it. The worker asked in surprise if he would really take it, even knowing the properties of that metal. Confirming this, Damien thought that unlike other rare alloys that enhance mana, the unison metal has a unique structure that repels mana and creates waves. Damien asked what the name of this sword was. The man thought for a moment, trying to remember. Then he said that he thought the knight who ordered the sword said he would name it the Sword of 1,000 Miles. Suddenly, the door of the smithy opened, and a woman entered and asked if Damien had found something suitable. Bowing, the girl said she was pleased to meet him. She then introduced herself as Rebecca, a servant of Lady Chelsea. Rebecca said that her mistress would like to meet him, and if he didn't mind, she might give them a little of her time. Damien replied that he didn't think he had anything to tell her. The maid said that who knows. Even if he didn't think so now, her mistress had something to offer him. She added that perhaps Damien would get something necessary and important. He thought that maybe she was beating around the bush, but ultimately wanted to curry favor with him. Besides, he wanted to check something. Thinking that maybe he should just pretend to agree and follow her, Damien said yes. When they approached the restaurant, Rebecca said that Lady Chelsea personally managed this restaurant. On the way, she said that the restaurant only accepts reservations and is only open to VIPs. Rebecca emphasized that today the entire restaurant had been reserved especially for his visit. Stopping at the door, the maid informed him that Lady Chelsea was waiting for him inside. She invited him to enter. Damien decided to ask Lady Chelsea what the offer was. Upon entering, Damien immediately smelled wine and something else that was quite familiar to him. Filling his glass, she invited him to sit down and added that he was a little late. Chelsea Gold Pixie looked at Damien with a sly glance and swirled the glass of wine, whose aroma was spreading throughout the room. Damien asked why she had called him. She noted that he was quite impatient and asked if he would like to have dinner first and then discuss everything properly. The guy replied that he didn't want to waste time and suggested getting straight down to business. She said that since he insisted, she had no choice. Chelsea said she had only one request. Looking intently at Damien, she asked him to refuse to represent her in the duel. Damien then asked if she really didn't trust Guillermo Blackwing. She replied that he shouldn't kid himself. If Guillermo took his axes, it wouldn't be difficult for him to deal with someone like him. Lady Chelsea added that she was making this request only because she wanted him to save his strength for the upcoming duel with the Marquis of Lionbloom's son. She noted that it would be problematic if the knight were injured in a senseless duel and asked if Damien agreed with this. He thought that in a sense she was right. Damien asked why he should agree to her request and what he would get in return. Chelsea replied that if he refused, she would do whatever he wanted. Damien then asked if she knew what he would ask for her. Chelsea Gold Pixie replied that a pathetic and inferior aristocrat like him would ask for obvious things. Money, fame, and all that stuff. He thought it was so arrogant to label everyone. Then Damien said that he assumed the Duke could give him more than she could. Lady Chelsea replied that it might seem that way now, but it was worth thinking carefully. Wouldn't it be better to be in the good graces of the future Duke? After that, Chelsea Goldpick said that since they had already figured everything out, he should go and tell her father about it. The sand in her hourglass had run out, and she told him to go and say that he was refusing. Damien Haxon raised his head and, looking at her, replied that he did not want to do that. His answer was unexpected and surprised her greatly. Chelsea exclaimed that it couldn't be that way. The boy thought to himself that she did not expect her aromatic spells to have no effect on him. Aromatic spells are a type of dark magic. They create a deceptive attachment to manipulate people. Thanks to his knowledge of black magic from his past life, he sensed it immediately. As soon as he entered the room, usually it takes an hour for an ordinary person to turn into an obedient slave with such concentration. However, his power of greed absorbed the aromatic spell to the last drop. Standing up, Damien told her to repeat it again, and asked if she hadn't said that it shouldn't be that way. Lady Chelsea exclaimed that she didn't mean that. Then she asked why he was refusing, since she had promised to give him whatever he wanted. Already heading for the door, the boy replied that he wasn't interested, because what he wanted most in the world she was still unable to give him. Chelsea Goldpixie shouted for him to say what it was that he wanted so desperately. Then Damien Haxon replied without even looking back that he wanted happiness for his family. The girl was ready to hear anything but that answer. Those words stunned her. Damien said it was time for him to go and asked her to tell Guillermo to prepare well for the duel. Lady Chelsea noted that his family must really mean a lot to him. Standing up, she said that she would then speak differently. Chelsea once again told him to refuse the role of representative. She threatened that otherwise the Haxon house would be wiped off the face of the earth forever. The next moment, Damien grabbed her by the throat and threw her onto the table. He asked how she dared to threaten him. Trying to pry his fingers from her neck, Chelsea croaked for him to let go. The knights burst into the hall and asked Lady Chelsea what the noise was. Seeing that Damien was holding her, the knight shouted at him for daring to lay his dirty hands on her. Damien released the Duke's daughter's neck and immediately rushed towards the knights who were guarding her. Grabbing a table knife, Damien slipped between the knights so quickly that they didn't even have time to react. The knight did not understand how, but he felt the blade pass through his throat and hot blood spurt from the wound. Both knights began to press on the wounds on their necks, trying to stop the bleeding. Damien said that the cut was not deep and that they needed to take the decoction right away. Then they would stay alive. Then he turned to Lady Chelsea and said that he would like to slit her throat right here and now, but he would restrain himself. He said that death would be too easy a punishment for her, so she should wait with anticipation. Then, glancing at her, he added that it would be terrible torment that he would personally prepare for her. She trembled as she watched Damien Haxon calmly walk out the door. Her guards were completely helpless. Lady Chelsea's maid, Rebecca, appeared at the door. She was alarmed when she saw her mistress frightened. The maid quickly ran up to Lady Chelsea Goldpix and asked if she was all right. Lady Chelsea was clearly not herself. She replied that the bastard had dared to insult her. She muttered that she would finish him off no matter what. She would simply destroy him. Then she called out loudly for Mustang Fury. A few minutes later, Mustang Fury appeared at the entrance and said that he had rushed over as soon as he heard the lady call. She screamed, asking what the hell had just happened and why the aromatic spells hadn't worked. He replied that he didn't understand either. He said that there is a very small percentage of people with innate immunity to dark magic. Maybe he is one of them. Lady Chelsea immediately slapped the mage and shouted that he was an idiot. Then she asked about Guillermo Blackwing and ordered him to tell her where he was immediately. The magician replied that Sir Guillermo was now in the tavern. He left, saying that he needed to let off some steam after what had happened. Lady Chelsea yelled that the duel was tomorrow and he had decided to get drunk. Had he completely lost his mind? She asked if the mage was sure that Guillermo could defeat Damien Haxon. He replied that of course he could. After all, Sir Guillermo was Yulan's true creation. He had never before seen a knight with a greater aptitude for dark magic. Mustang Fury turned to Lady Chelsea and asked her to be patient. After all, Yulan would not let her down. The duchy's estate would definitely end up in her hands. Giving him an angry look, she said that he had better keep his word, otherwise he would be the first to lose his head. The mage replied that he understood her. This conversation proved to be quite informative and interesting for Damien, who was standing on the cornice just above the window of that hall. It was already very late, but the lights were still on in several rooms of the Duke's estate. Exhausted from the day, Victor fell asleep, still clutching the weapon they had purchased at Duke Goldpix's forge. But Damien Haxon was not ready to sleep. He examined his new sword and at the same time sorted through a bunch of thoughts in his head. He thought about Yulan and how he never suspected that he would meet them here again. Those damn plow mages. And, as he had expected, Chelsea Goldpix had contacted the Black Magicians. Then the energy he had felt from Guillermo that time was probably also black magic. Knowing the properties of the monolithic metal from which the sword was made, Damien tapped its blade several times, creating a sound shockwave. The sound wave knocked the hourglass off the dresser under which Victor was sleeping. The clock fell right on the servant's head and then onto the floor. But Victor was sleeping so soundly that he didn't even feel it. Damien decided that there was no point in bothering the Duke with explanations when it would be better to show him everything tomorrow. In the morning, Guillermo Blackwing appeared on the training ground, determined to defeat his opponent. His whole appearance demonstrated his readiness and strength. Pebble Vermont told his brothers that he looked incredibly strong. One of the brothers asked Pebble who he thought would win the fight. After thinking for a moment, he replied that judging by their reputations, Guillermo Blackwing would probably win. Then the brother asked if, in that case, they would be able to escape from the clutches of that demon, Damien Haxon. After all, what he had done to them over the past 2 days was nothing less than a beating. The brother added that he was sure Damien Haxon enjoyed it. Sighing, Pebble said that he also wanted Damien Haxon to lose, but he couldn't imagine him being defeated. Damien Haxon also came out to warm up on the training ground. Victor shouted to the young man that he really wanted him to win. Ernst Howitz also came to watch the fight, and most importantly, to see Damien Haxon's defeat. Damien Haxon stood opposite Guillermo Blackwing. He behaved very confidently. Guillermo Blackwing mockingly told Damien that he hadn't run away after all, and that he was impressed. But the guy didn't react to his words. Rubbing his shoulder, he said that he hadn't slept well last night, and his shoulder was sore. Guillermo noticed that he was acting completely calm. Sitting down in the chair prepared for him, Adam Goldpix said that it seemed he was the only one who was late. He announced that as an apology, whoever won today's match would be awarded the position of representative. Glancing sideways at his daughter, Duke Goldpixie added that he hoped everyone would accept the result with dignity. Chelsea understood who this remark was directed at. She mentally told her father to enjoy it while he could because Sir Guillermo Blackwing would win this fight. Gathering himself to throw the white handkerchief, Duke Goldpixie said that the duel had begun. With these words, the handkerchief flew up and the duelists took up their weapons. Spinning his axes, Guillermo turned to Damien Haken and said that he had made the biggest mistake of his life by agreeing to this duel. As he advanced, Guillermo added that he would now show why he was called a wild beast. Looking closely at Guillermo's axe, Damien saw that it was full of dark energy. The boy only lightly struck the monotonous metal of his sword, awakening its true power. Absorbing the mana, the sword created a sound shield that not only protected the boy from Guillermo's blow, but also repelled him. The sound wave threw Guillermo back several meters. Stopping, he asked in surprise what that was. Seeing this, Chelsea Goldpix began to worry whether Guillermo would be able to defeat the boy. With a slight smile, Duke Adam Goldpixie remarked that it was a rather unusual technique. Angered, Guillermo shouted that he was trash, not a knight, and asked what kind of strange magic he was using. But Damien did not answer. The boy just stood calmly in place and created sound shockwaves. One of the sound shockwaves hit Guillermo Blackwing's arm. He immediately groaned from the strong blow. The force of the shockwave was enough to damage Guillermo's arm. He paused for a moment and caught his breath. The next sound shockwave hit his opponent directly in the face, breaking his nose. Guillermo bent over, spitting out the blood that flowed like a river from his broken nose. Wiping the blood from his face, Guillermo Blackwing hissed at the little bastard. Raising his sword, Damien Haxon shouted that it was time to stop fooling around. Then he slammed his sword into the ground, creating powerful shockwaves that engulfed the entire training ground. These waves were so powerful that they were able to knock the black energy out of Guillermo's body. Duke Adam Goldpix almost jumped out of his chair at the sight, but he wasn't the only one surprised. Everyone present simply opened their mouths when they saw what was happening on the field. A large lump rose in Guillermo Blackwing's throat. He tried to swallow it, but couldn't. Guillermo groaned and began to vomit. Black magic poured out of his body. Adam Goldpix asked the knight what was happening to Sir Guillermo. He wondered if it was really magic. Chelsea Goldpix clenched her teeth in disappointment. She thought that this simply couldn't be happening. Damien approached Guillermo and said that his true nature had come out. Looking at the now frail body, Damien Haxon called Guillermo a false knight. Duke Adam Goldpix asked Damien what he meant by a false knight. Everyone waited for the answer with bated breath. Even Victor, who had already seen a lot, froze in place. The young man replied that he had enhanced his physical abilities with the help of black magic. Therefore, he was essentially a fake knight. Some of those who had come to watch the fight with the so-called wild beast, upon hearing about black magic, exclaimed that it was outrageous. And if the church found out about it, there would be trouble, and first of all, it was necessary to find out his true identity. The Duke turned to Damien and asked how he found out who he really was. Bowing, Damien said he was sorry he couldn't tell him about it earlier. Damien explained that the reason he couldn't tell him was because he wanted to find out who was behind it all. The young man said that black magicians had infiltrated his home. Then, looking at Lady Chelsea, Damien added that there was someone in the house who was connected to them. Damien then announced that this person was Lady Chelsea Goldpixie. Hearing him say her name, the girl jumped up. She immediately turned to her father and shouted that she did not understand what he was talking about. The Duke croaked that now that he had thought about it, he couldn't deny it. He just didn't want to admit it. Adam Goldpix asked his daughter how she dared to let this shit into the house. Then he ordered the soldiers not to stand around. He ordered Lady Chelsea and everyone involved to be locked up in prison and to find out everything about them. Chelsea shouted at her father that she had been framed. The soldiers immediately began to carry out the Duke's orders. Grabbing Guillermo by the arms, they dragged him to prison. Realizing that she was next, Chelsea Goldpix thought that this would not work. If she was caught, everything would be revealed. Chelsea Goldpixie asked the knights what they were doing and immediately ordered them to protect her. Ernst Howitz immediately rushed to carry out his mistress's order and attacked one of the soldiers who were about to capture her. Sighing heavily, the Duke turned to the knight jail and ordered him to immediately arrest Lady Chelsea Goldpixie. Bowing as befits a knight, Jail set out to carry out Duke Goldpixie's order. She was protected by middle-ranking knights whom she had charmed. Lady Chelsea hid behind their backs. Releasing his aura, Gale Heimlich ordered the knights to step aside and not interfere with him. The knight who was defending her thought that this was a higher class and they were not ready to fight someone of that level. So he shouted to Lady Chelsea that they would delay him and she should find a way to escape. Seeing that the knights were not going to retreat, Gale Heimlich grabbed the hilt of his sword and said that it was a pity. Gale Heimlich made only one swing of his sword, releasing an extraordinary amount of energy. Frightened, Chelsea Goldpixie screamed and crouched down in fear. She felt the sword cut her hair. But when she looked back, she saw that her knights were still standing and was surprised. But the next moment, Lady Chelsea saw the knights' hands holding their swords begin to fall. The knight's hot blood splattered onto Chelsea Goldpix's already frightened face. Then both knights simply collapsed in front of her. The girl instinctively stepped back. Lady Chelsea looked at Jael Hemlich, who was slowly walking towards her. She muttered for him not to come any closer. Looking around, she saw the knight Ernst Howitz and called out to him. But he remained standing in place. Chelsea Goldpix began to beg Ernst Howitz to save her. She repeated her request several times. As a knight, he could not refuse a lady who begged for salvation. Besides, he had feelings for her. Ernst Howitz jumped between Lady Chelsea and Jael Heimlich with the intention of protecting the girl. Seeing how the knight Howitz rushed to defend Chelsea Goldpix, Damien thought that he was a fool. Jael Heimlich addressed Ernst Howitz as a third-class knight and noted that he had made a great contribution to the development of the ducal house. Knight Jael Heimlich added that, moreover, His Highness highly valued him as a knight. Ernst Howitz tried his best to resist the pressure of Jael Heimlich's aura, but his efforts were clearly not enough. Then Jael Heimlich said that despite all his merits, if he continued to defend Lady Chelsea, he would immediately execute him on the spot. Knight Howitz groaned under the pressure of the aura but still tried to hold on, even though he knew what awaited him. In the end, he made his choice and retreated. Ernst threw down his spear and bowed before Jael Heimlich. The soldiers grabbed Chelsea Goldpix, but she still tried to resist and break free. She turned to her father and begged him to listen to her. She swore to him that she had nothing to do with it. Lady Chelsea asked him to give her a chance to explain, but the Duke, without even looking at her, shouted for her to be quiet and called her worthless. Adam Goldpixie shouted that her actions could bring disaster upon their family. She had sullied them all with this filth, and even now, she was only thinking of her own safety. Disappointed, the Duke muttered through clenched teeth that bringing her into the family was his biggest mistake. She screamed again that she had nothing to do with it and demanded to be released. The Duke said he couldn't listen to this anymore and ordered the guards to shut her up and take her away from his sight. The guards immediately obeyed the Duke's order and covered the girl's mouth with their hands so she could no longer scream. The girl continued to resist, so the guards had to drag her out of the training ground. Chelsea Goldpixie looked at Damien and continued to scream something, but with her mouth covered, only a kind of moaning could be heard. Damien Haxon already understood that she was obviously trying to threaten him again. Watching the soldiers take her away, the boy gave her a sly smile because he had won after all. For several days, screams of prisoners being tortured for information had been heard from the Duke's prison. Ordinary beatings did not help, so methods involving the use of red-hot metal were used. The knight shouted that this was all he knew. Just when you breathe in this scent, you fall in love with Lady Chelsea. Jael Heimlich said that he had had enough of this guy and ordered the next one to be brought in for questioning. The knight thought that everything was as expected. Lady Chelsea was probably expanding her influence in the Duke's family with the help of dark magic. Looking at the tortured former knight, Jael wondered why Lady Chelsea was doing this. Chelsea Goldpix lay curled up on the stone floor of her prison cell. When she tried to sit up, she felt a sharp pain in her side from the beating she had received during interrogation. But it wasn't her body that hurt the most. Before her eyes was her father's gaze. It was full of contempt and disdain. Lady Chelsea wondered if it was her fault. She just wanted to be recognized. She wanted everyone to recognize her as his daughter. That was all she wanted, to be his daughter. Since childhood, she had tried to get her father's attention. But all her efforts were in vain. He did not appreciate or notice her efforts to become someone to him. She asked herself why he still looked at her with such a cold gaze. Hearing footsteps behind her, she turned around and saw that someone had stopped near her cell. Opening the cell door, the knight placed a plate of bread on the floor. Turning to Lady Chelsea, the young man informed her that he had brought her something to eat. The girl glanced sideways at the small loaf of ordinary bread. Until recently, she would not have considered it food. Deciding that she couldn't let it end like this, Chelsea Goldpix began to eat the bread to keep her strength up. No matter how humiliating it was, she had to survive no matter what. The boy remained standing by the cell door while Lady Chelsea eagerly bit off pieces of bread. Damien walked down the corridor, stretching his shoulder. He said that training in the ruins was over for today. Victor was standing at the door of his room. Seeing Damien, the servant asked if he had returned and informed him that the Duke was looking for him. Uncorking a new bottle, he began to slowly pour the fragrant red wine into a glass. Adam Goldpix offered Damien a taste, and the young man did not refuse. After tasting it, Damien noted that the wine was good. The Duke laughed and said he was glad that he liked it. This wine was not expensive, but it was his favorite. Taking another sip, Duke Goldpixie repeated that the wine was really good. Handing Damien a plate, Adam Goldpixie said that it was angel cheese from the Blanco region. This cheese goes perfectly with this wine. Damien Haxon took a piece of cheese from the plate and thanked the Duke for his hospitality. While Damien was tasting the cheese, the Duke said he wanted to say something about the situation with Chelsea. He said that he had finally decided to accept the church's help. The young man said that this was surprising as he thought the Duke would conduct the investigation himself. Adam Goldpix replied that he actually felt guilty towards him after everything he had done. He also said that they had lost all the black magicians. Damien was alarmed and asked if the Duke was joking. The Duke replied that it was true. They had captured everyone who was close to Chelsea, but there were no dark magicians among them. Adam Goldpix added that he thought he should know how things were going. Damien cursed silently. How could they have let them get away? Maybe he really should have intervened. The Duke then said that he didn't want to arouse the suspicion of the church, so they had been given the task of finding the dark mages. Damien asked if Chelsea had said who the dark mages were. Adam Goldpix replied that she hadn't. Even under brutal torture, she hadn't said a word. A tough nut to crack. The Duke drank his wine in one gulp, put the glass on the table, and said that she had not always been like that. Duke Goldpixie began to tell them that Chelsea's mother was actually a commoner. In his youth, while hunting with knights, the Duke accidentally met her, and soon she became pregnant with Chelsea. At first, he refused to believe that one mistake could lead to her carrying his child. Later, he realized how humiliating it was that his blood flowed in the veins of a person of lower origin, and so he drove them away when they came. Some time passed, and the Duke suddenly became interested in the child he had once abandoned. So he ordered an investigation and learned that the woman had died of the plague and the child had survived on her own. So he brought her into his home. Smiling, the Duke said that looking back, he realized that it was so unlike him. And why did he do it? Listening to his story, Damien thought for a moment. Then he said that perhaps he did it because she was part of the family. Leaning back in his chair, the Duke repeated the word family several times. Then he asked if that was really what she wanted. To truly become a family? Adam Goldpick said that maybe she felt that all these actions were the only way to get his recognition, and she could have lived like a normal noblewoman. The Duke noted that alcohol seemed to be taking effect, judging by how talkative he had become, and apologized for talking nonsense. Suddenly, they heard someone in the hallway calling the Duke and asking if anyone had seen him. The door to the hall opened and a servant ran in. He asked anxiously if the Duke was there. Adam Goldpicks asked what all the noise was about. The servant informed the Duke that something terrible had happened to Lady Chelsea. When the soldiers came to take her for another interrogation, they were very frightened by what they saw. Chelsea Goldpixie was found hanged in her own cell. By the time she was found, she was already dead.